Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin.
I wanted to take just a minute on this podcast episode to tell you a little bit about the online course that we are offering now, the Bit Course 2.0, Understanding How and Why Bits Function. You can find it at the website, thebitcourse.com, which will be linked in the show notes. This is a very comprehensive course. We've got two different versions. There's a masterclass version where weekly we have live calls and go over the modules and the study guide. That course has been running 25 to 30 hours over the course of 7 weeks. If you take that version, you're also eligible to go through our BIT certification program and take that test. It's at no additional cost if you want to add consulting about bits to your repertoire of body work or whatever else you might be doing. We also will have an evergreen version that you can take anytime you work at your own pace. It is less expensive. It's also a lot less content. You don't have the weekly Zoom calls with me. Those are going about 2 to 2.5 hours each week. So the masterclass course winds up 25, 30 hours long. The evergreen course you're going to do in 12 to 15, something like that. So check it out. You can go to thebitcourse.com, sign up for the free newsletter. You'll get a 30-minute video on the foamy mouth and all of the implications of that, as well as 5 or 6 articles that I've written regarding bits. Get a feel for the content. This will absolutely be some of the best money and time you have ever spent on your horsemanship journey, I assure you. And it is not discipline specific. We cover just about every aspect of the horse world that you can think of. Our guest today is Mr. Richard Boatwright of B1 Horsemanship. I was going to ask him where the B1 comes from, but right here on his website, he's got the Stoicism quote from Marcus Aurelius: "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. B1." I really like that. Richard hails from Florida, where he has worked on multiple ranches, including the Creek Ranch. He's been doing this for a good long while, over 30 years. He has started out and cut his teeth in rodeoing in the saddle bronc and bareback events, then got into some more of the show horses. So he's done the Blue Blood performance horse lines, the Foundation ranch lines, the Shetland ponies, the OTTBs. He's done all of it. Richard is one of the few people that can say that he has worked for not one but 2 AQHA Remuda award-winning ranches. He has started his own deal now called B1 Horsemanship in South Carolina. I've been following him on social media for a little while, and I could tell right away from his YouTube videos and all that he knows what the heck he's doing, and I thought we would have a pretty good conversation. So, Richard, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing really good, Daniel. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, no problem. Like I said, I like the way that you go about stuff. I don't know if you forked your YouTube channel, but it started out as Low Country Cowboys and all, and now you've got the B1 Horsemanship going on. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that for anybody that might be confused as to where you're at or what you're doing?
Well, let me correct you on one thing real quick. It wasn't the Creek Ranch, it's Creek Plantation.
Okay.
So we got, I have a long history with Creek, goes all the way back to the early 2000s. And in 2017, and I'll make this a much longer story than it has to be. In 2017, I took over as head trainer at Creek, and we were going to have a horse sale, a herd reduction sale, you might call it. And Creek Plantation's owned by a family. They own several businesses, and they have an on-staff videographer. The videographer came out to take some pictures and shoot some video of these sale horses. And he was really impressed with the ranch, the scenery and the horses and that sort of thing. So he approached me one day and asked me if I would be interested in being a part of a documentary that he wanted to shoot about the ranch. And of course, I told him, sure. I was flattered, and I thought it would, we'd have a good time with it. And we never really shot a documentary. It actually turned into Low Country Cowboys, the YouTube series that you see there now. and we shot, I don't know how many episodes. It might be 20 something episodes. I'm not really sure, but it sort of fizzled out just because the ranch, you can imagine. It was a pretty good size operation at the time. We were running about 150 horses and about 2,000 head of cattle, and keeping up with all of those enterprises ate up most of my time, and so it was difficult to continue on with with low country. So it sort of went away, but I learned quite a bit about producing video during that time. The videographer that handled all that, his name is Mark Alberton, and Mark was, as you can tell from the quality of low country, if you've watched any of it, it was very high quality. He's very good at what he does, and he taught me a lot. And I'm just the kind of guy that it's hard for me to stay on the outside of something like that. I have to sort of get on the inside and learn things. And so I learned quite a bit about producing that video, and I started using the skills that I acquired to produce video to help train employees at the ranch. We had folks coming on that wanted to learn how to ride and how to train horses and start colts and that sort of thing. But it was difficult for me to stay with them all the time. And so we started making videos to help train them. And that was kind of where B1 got its start. And then when I decided to leave Creek, I've got a couple of kids that really like to play ball, and Creek's very isolated. It was an hour to town for them to go to practices and that sort of thing. And so it just seemed like a good time to retire from ranch life. And to be honest with you, B1 was the only thing that I had going at the time, besides training some outside horses. And so it was just a natural thing to do. And I'm really glad that I took that leap and dove off into B1, because it's sort of taken off and we really enjoy it and have a lot of fun with it. So
very cool. So is Creek Plantation, is that in Florida or is that in South Carolina or multiple places or what?
It's in Martin, South Carolina, a very rural community. It spans over 2 counties. For the Southeast, it's a pretty good size agricultural endeavor. They also do they have horses, cattle, and timber. Spans about 6 miles of the Savannah River. The folks that own it are from Augusta, Georgia, which is about an hour away.
Where are you now? What's the headquarters of B1?
We're in Pelzer, South Carolina, which is about 3.5 hours north of Creek, a suburb of Greenville, South Carolina.
And I also wanted to get into Florida. That's kind of where you hail from. And I think a lot of people might not realize just how many cattle are in Florida. I think it's the second biggest cattle state in the whole United States, and 2 of the biggest ranches in the country are down there. And I don't know if this is still true, but a little bit of trivia. When I was in college and I was going over these statistics, the second biggest ranch in the United States was in Florida, and it was owned by the Bellamy brothers, of all people. So do you have any connection to that at all, or no?
Well, I wouldn't say that I really have ties to Okeechobee anymore. When I was a kid, my dad was a day working cowboy, and that's sort of what I grew up knowing. And there are 2 things to do in Okeechobee. You can fish or you can be a cowboy. It has Lake Okeechobee is the second largest natural freshwater lake in the United States. That's kind of their claim to fame. It's very isolated. It's surrounded by orange groves and cow pastures, and the lake, of course, on the south side. And then, of course, development is always an issue in Florida. Okeechobee hasn't been impacted like, say, Orlando or Miami has been with the development, but it's always pushing in. So those huge ranches are always shrinking,
I feel like I kind of have to ask you about some of the differences of living in Florida versus the rest of the world. So the first thing I've got on my list here is some of the invasive species, as well as the gators that would naturally be there. So at the time that you were there, did y'all have the iguanas and the pythons and all of that stuff taken over, or was that kind of pre those days?
I don't remember. I don't remember pythons and iguanas when I was a kid. Of course, gators. It's just something that we grew up with. It was strange for me to find out that people didn't know about alligators when I left South Florida. But no, I don't remember the invasive species. And I'm sure they were there. They must have been. What's interesting is that the pythons that started showing up at Creek. We had a guy there, saw one. We don't know exactly what it was, but it was a huge snake. Of course, the invasive species they're eventually going to affect everybody.
I remember when I was a little kid, we saw the first group of hogs coming around, and it was kind of a novelty, and didn't seem like that big of a deal. We hunted some of them, but it wasn't for survival at that point of those dang things taking over like a plague. I think I've heard that Texas could kill 5 million hogs a year without affecting the population at all. And the pythons are getting to be that way. I don't know if you do a lot of social media following of other people, but there's a guy called Python Cowboy, and that's pretty much all he does is hunt iguanas and pythons. And he's got a Drothar, like a German wired-haired pointer, but one of the original ones. So they're considered a lot sharper. They will hunt game as well as birds, and that dog is on point, go grabbing iguanas and stuff. And he goes on golf courses with a pellet rifle, and he's basically a pest mitigation sort of a thing, but he's made a heck of a channel out of it. Looks like a lot of fun. I think he's doing like guided hunts now for people to come over there and hunt iguanas and pythons with him.
How about that?
You might check that out. Anyway, he's
yeah, I'll look him up. Yeah, it's funny how people, there's financial opportunities everywhere there.
Mm-hmm. I will say sometimes he puts some music on his videos I don't appreciate too much, but you can always hit mute and just watch what's going on there.
Yeah, I have to check him out.
Well, one other thing that I have to ask you about, I think you're the first guest I've had on here that has this in your background as well as me, and I know it can be kind of like the gators. It's one of those things we just take in stride, but for the rest of the world, it would seem pretty extreme, and that's hurricanes. So you moved from a state with hurricanes to another state with hurricanes, and you seem to not be too bothered by them, I guess. So do you have any good hurricane stories for us?
Maybe. We could probably go on for days about hurricanes. The first one that I remember was Hurricane David when I was a kid. Came all the way into Okeechobee, and just to give you an idea of, how sort of relaxed we were about hurricanes, my sister and I the hurricane was in full swing. We had the windows of the house boarded up, and most folks had evacuated, but we stuck around. And my sister and I were in the backyard throwing the baseball during the hurricane, and my mother had an absolute come apart. She came into the backyard screaming at us to come back in the house before we got killed. But yeah. And then in 92, Hurricane Andrew hit down there in Homestead, and I went down with some friends of mine to work to help with the cleanup and rebuild of Hurricane Andrew. And then, of course, I think it was I believe it was Matthew that hit in the fall of 2017 or 2016, I believe it was, hit Creek. And that was pretty significant. We spent about 3 weeks going around and just cleaning stuff off of fence lines, gathering cattle, and working chainsaws and backhoe, just trying to clean the place up. That was, and I actually slept through that entire hurricane. I woke up the next morning and found out that we'd had all of that damage, and we'd actually gotten 9 inches of rain overnight there. I don't know. When you grow up in Florida, hurricanes just aren't a big deal. Louisiana, you guys probably deal with them too.
Yeah, it's if it's over a Cat 3, I'll take notice, but anything below a Cat 3 is not going to change the world a whole lot.
Right.
I was going to ask you about Hurricane Ivan. Do you remember that one? That was the one that hit Florida 2 or 3 times. It came through the Caribbean, hit Florida, came through the Gulf, hit Louisiana, went across the southeast back toward the Atlantic. So across Alabama and Georgia and all that, back into the Atlantic, strengthened again, made a little loop, and came back and hit Florida again. So I think we had three separate coming onshore events with the same hurricane. And I've always kind of remembered it for that. I have a hard time with all the names because there's so dang many of them, but unless they're like Katrina and Rita, but yeah.
I was just going to say Katrina's the big one.
Well, so like Rita was actually a bigger hurricane than Katrina. It just hit in an area where there weren't very many people. But I know that was closer to me actually than Katrina was. There are houses that were picked up and moved 5 miles out into the marsh and just dropped in the middle of nowhere. There was one particular house, you know, you get these weird hurricane stories. Half of the house is ripped off. It's deposited into the marsh out there, and there was still like 5 mason jars on a shelf completely undisturbed. And you know how they go through that whole deal and just get moved 5 miles and here's stuff on the shelf like nothing happened. I was going to ask you too, mosquitoes. So that's been one of the, as far as livestock goes, the worst aftermath of the hurricanes. I had some friends 2 or 3 years ago. They lost 50 head of cattle to mosquitoes because they actually got on the noses so thick and suffocated them, smothered them out. Have y'all had any of those types of deals with hurricanes out there? No.
Not that I'm aware of. No. You know, of course, everybody says that the mosquito is the Florida state bird. My Uncle Tommy is the only, my grandparents had 4 sons, and he's the only one living that can remember the old days of Florida. And he might be able to tell us some stories about that. But, you know, what's funny about the mosquitoes is we go out to North Park, Colorado each year. The guys out there warn me about the mosquitoes in the summer. And I said, boys, I'm from Florida. You're not scaring me with the mosquitoes. But let me tell you, I was wrong. The mosquitoes in Colorado are no joke.
Huh. I wonder if they're the same kind of mosquito. Like, I know that's one of the things that happens when the hurricanes hits. We have like a light gray. I'm 20 or 30 miles inshore, and our normal mosquito is like light gray. And when the hurricanes hit, they blow up a mosquito that's more black and has like white stripes on its legs, and those are a lot worse for whatever reason. So I don't know how many species of mosquito there might be, but maybe Colorado just has a more aggressive one or something.
They seem to be smaller. And I don't see, you know, I know you're talking about the striped mosquitoes, but we don't see those there.
Well, let's get into horses a little bit. So you're a son of a day work cowboy, and you're in high school, presumably. So how does that all fall out for you? Does rodeoing happen first, or are you a 13-year-old day working on the weekends, or how did it begin for you?
So my folks split up when I was pretty young. I grew up in Okeechobee, and I went through the 8th grade in Okeechobee, and we always had horses. We had what you call cracker horses, which is kind of like the Florida version of the Mustang. And we had ponies, and Dad would bring home, you know, those. We had a few thoroughbreds and just whatever we could ride. But when my folks split up, Dad went to California, and starting my 10th grade year of high school, I moved out to California, and we actually lived in Sunnyvale, which is Santa Clara County, which is right in the heart of the Silicon Valley. And that's when my skateboarding career took off, which we still rode horses. Dad kept his horses out in Mountain View, California, near Stanford University. There's a fellow out there that had a small ranch, and he'd keep horses out there, so we rode and stuff. But I more or less got into skateboarding in my later teen years and didn't circle back around really and decide that I wanted to be a cowboy until I was back in my 20s. And I started rodeoing a little late in life. I decided that I really just wanted to, you know, all I ever really wanted to do was be a cowboy. I wanted to ride bucking horses primarily. And so I got into saddle bronc riding And then I had the opportunity to go to work for Creek Plantation in the early 2000s, starting colts. And so but I was really drawn to starting colts because I like to ride bucking horses. Never really did like rodeoing per se, but I just liked bucking horses. And whether it was the right reason, the wrong reason, or whatever, it sent me down this rabbit hole of being a horseman. That's kind of where it ended up. I didn't rodeo in high school. I didn't go to college till later in life, till I started college when I was 25. Didn't finish. Really didn't get along with school too much. I would have loved to have college rodeoed, but I just really didn't have the opportunity to do those sorts of things. And so I picked up rodeoing a little bit later in life and started riding colts because I like bucking horses, and that was it. And so I love the image. I was fascinated with the cowboy lifestyle. Yeah, and that's it. I mean, the bucking horses is really what drew me into it. My dad, of course, gave me my start, or sort of, they plant that seed. I think that everybody has to have that seed planted by somebody. It's definitely a genetic thing. The horse thing has got to be genetic because, like in my family, I've got 4 kids, and some of them love horses and some of them don't care about horses. So, and it was the same for me and my brothers. I had actually 4 brothers and sisters, and I'm the only one out of all of them that cares anything about horses and cowboying. So I don't think you can avoid it, but what I was getting at was my dad sort of planted the seed, and then I saw Lonesome Dove when I was in high school, and that opening scene where Call's bucking out it's a gray gelding, of course, but they call it a mare. I couldn't get the image out of my head, and that's what I wanted to do. So.
And rein chains on split reins. Yeah, there's a little bit in there that could be bothersome, but we just overlook it. I agree. One of the best movies ever made. Have you ever read the book by chance?
No, I started reading the book, but I didn't finish it. And then I found out that Lonesome Dove was actually not a book first. McMurtry wrote that as a screenplay. First, I believe it was a movie to begin with, and then he had to adapt it for TV, and they turned it into a miniseries. And so I never did finish reading the book. I think I read the first couple of chapters.
I think it's the best book ever written. I've read it several times, actually. It may be a little slow getting going, and there's a lot of scenes in there that aren't in the movie or that are a little more graphic. I'll just say I read it for the first time when I was about 14 or 15, and a 14 or 15-year-old probably should not read that book. You need to be over 18, I think, is a better time to put that in a kid's hands. Well, I have to back up to skateboarding, right, because that I didn't see coming. And I'm also realizing as we do this, I forgot to start this out with the lightning round questions. I'm a little out of practice on the podcast. So how about we'll do those now, and then we'll get back into skateboarding, if you don't mind. Usually we do this as an icebreaker, and like I say, I'm just out of practice. I've been scrambling this morning trying to get all the horses fed and then take a shower for this before this big storm hit, and I'm just a little discombobulated. All right, and keep in mind these are for points and prizes, so you want to have your A game set here. If you were a Jedi, what % chance would there be that you would use the Force inappropriately?
100%.
Very good. It's the only honest answer. It really is, right?
Might as well be honest, right? Yeah, I think anybody that answers, any way other than that's probably not honest.
Morning or evening?
Morning for sure. Yeah, no question about it. I'm ready to go to bed early.
Bay or sorrel?
Well, the best horses I've ever had were all sorrels, but truth be known, if you're to put them right next to each other and all things are equal, then I'd pick a bay. Isn't that funny?
I gotta say, like, that's one of those questions I just kind of threw in there to take up space, and I figured it would work out 50-50, and it's not even close. It's 90% bay horses. I had no clue
Yeah.
that there was that strong of a preference for bay horses. And you don't see it in the world. You go to sales or something, it's not like bays or like black and white paints or something that just, ding, ding, ding. But I mean, that's really been one of the more surprising little trends that's shown up in these questions for me. Dogs or cats?
That's a good question too. I have dogs. In fact, I just bought one yesterday, bought a new one, but I'd rather be around a cat, to be honest with you. I'm kind of a closet cat person. We don't even have a cat, but the dogs drive me crazy. The cats are so much low maintenance, But
Well, what kind of dog did you pick up yesterday?
I got a hanging tree.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I actually don't have him yet. I'm going to get him in a couple of weeks, but I traded for him yesterday. I'm looking forward to it. My old dog, I've got a Kelpie that I've had for he's 13 years old this year, and his trip to Colorado last year was his last one. He's just about blind and deaf, so I had to upgrade. So I'm looking forward to getting him. He's been trained by a good friend of mine, and I've never bought a started dog before, so looking forward to this one.
Okay, well, that was my next question. I think you'll like it. I've had both Kelpies and hanging trees, and I love them both. I like the border collies, but it seems like only like 1 out of 10 is actually gritty enough for my taste, and I have not had that problem with the hanging trees and the Kelpies. They are teeth on a stick, basically. So, think you're going to like that. Does pineapple belong on pizza?
Sure, just not on my pizza.
Okay. Are you a cook at all?
Not really. I do like to cook. I like to cook meat and eggs. I wouldn't say that if it needs more spice than just salt and pepper, then no, I'm not much of one. But my latest thing is cooking brisket, and I have to say I've gotten pretty good at it. I really enjoy that. So,
Well, since you're in the low country there, and we've got this in common, are you a big low country boil guy?
yeah, I like low country boil. It's been a long time since I've ate it, but yeah, it's fantastic. You bet.
That's one of our crawfish season is suffering after the drought last year. Their crop is something like 10 or 15% of what it normally is. So it's been a game changer in South Louisiana this year.
I was just going to say that's a staple for you guys, isn't it?
It certainly is, yes, sir. And it's about to be shrimp and crab season starting up, so that'll help us out a little bit. But crawfish is 6 months out of the year. That's a major crop in this area. I'm where this place is. We're surrounded by crawfish ponds, so they're going to be hurting for a couple of years, is what they're saying after the drought killing off so many of them. How many holes would you say are in a straw?
Just one.
I think that's the only correct answer.
Right.
Yes, sir. Do you have a horse or cow industry related pet peeve?
Man, I could write a book on that. Yeah, I've got a lot of them. I'm ashamed to say, without being too judgy, I don't know. I mean, I really want folks to hang my bridles properly.
That's a big one. Yep. I did a video just on how to get the bridle reins right. Yes, sir. Right there with you. Feral or spoiled? If you had to deal with a new horse coming in, which would you prefer?
That's a good question. Well, all things being equal, let's say that both horses are bred the same, raised, well, they wouldn't be raised the same, but let's say they're bred the same conformation and all. I would probably pick the spoiled horse over a feral horse. Yeah, I would.
Crunchy or smooth peanut butter?
Well, I like crunchy, but my kids like it smooth, so that's what I eat.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's my wife, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you've already let the skateboard out of the bag, but would you tell us something unexpected about you?
That's pretty unexpected, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought I wasn't expecting that one to come up. Um, I'll give you a little one about me. I grew up on a lake water skiing, and I actually flirted with the idea of becoming a professional slalom skier. So no wheels on mine, but I'm there with you on that one too. I don't think my left knee could handle it anymore, though.
Yeah.
If you could pick any superpower, what superpower would you choose?
Flight, I guess. Yeah.
Thoughts or feelings?
Thoughts.
Are you decisive or indecisive?
I'm decisive for sure. I learned a long time ago. Well, I shouldn't say I've learned it, I've been learning this my entire life. I've come to the realization that you don't make good or bad decisions. You just make your decision and then you make it good. You just don't
Yep.
know what's on the other side of that. So there's no point in being indecisive. You just make your decision and then work your butt off to make it good.
What year did music end for you?
What year did music end?
Yeah, or do you still listen to like current music coming out, or like nothing after the year
Oh,
2000, or
that's a good question. I like some of the cowboy artists, some of the really young cowboy artists now, and I'll listen to their music.
like
I can't really say that I'm into popular music per se, but I would say probably, I was in my 20s in the 90s, and so I'm kind of tied to that era of music.
what is the best smell in the barn?
Horses, horse sweat,
Salty, sweet, or spicy?
salty.
That's a really popular one, salty, I think, and I think it has to deal with those of us that are outside sweating our butts off every day. We crave salt more than we crave sweet, I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
maybe you're right.
what is your favorite dinosaur or deep sea creature?
Oh, I don't have one of those. Next question.
Well, you got grandkids coming up, man. You're gonna have to come up with some dinosaur stuff here before long.
Yeah, the reptiles. Yeah, I'm not into the reptiles or the sea creatures. You can keep those. I'm glad that we don't live during the area. Even though I grew up around the alligators, I have no use for that stuff.
I was gonna say, yeah, those are living dinosaurs there.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a UFO encounter?
No.
That's another one of those surprising ones. A bunch of people have had some sort of seen some kind of lights in the sky or whatever unexplainable. So, all right. Well, that brings us to the conclusion, Richard. And let me tabulate your score here. I've got you at 1,731 points, which is our high score for the game of all time. You're the ultimate champion right now. And that entitles you to either an awkward silence or a genuine compliment, your choice.
Well, I'll challenge you, Daniel, and take the compliment.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to say that like when I immediately found you on YouTube, and that's been back in the low country days, so that's a few years ago. It was immediately apparent to me that you knew what you were doing and everything. But what I thought set you apart and what I really appreciate about you is you've got a very practical, down to earth, no frills or highfalutin trying to make yourself sound smarter or whatever, or make simple things complicated. Just a very practical, straightforward, this is how I would deal with this, and this is what I think is going on right now. I particularly remember this was again in the low country video series. This is kind of where you won me over. You were riding a 3-year-old and flagging a 2-year-old, and the 3-year-old you were on kind of started to hump up with you a little bit, and you handled that very well. It didn't rattle you in the least or anything. You kind of just went on about your business with everything, and I was like, yeah, I could get along with this guy pretty well. I like the way that you handled all of that. And again, you didn't make a big deal out of it or use it to bolster your own ego or anything along those lines. And so I really appreciated that about you. And then going to your website and seeing a Marcus Aurelius quote right there at the top, and the stoicism thing and all. I appreciate that greatly. So I think we're kind of birds of a feather in a lot of ways. So so I'm tickled that you agreed to come on the podcast, and I'm really looking forward to our chat.
Well, thank you for that, Daniel. I really appreciate that. I want to return the compliment and say that I watched your bidding video, excuse me, and I was thoroughly impressed. I really appreciate, excuse me, I really appreciate how thorough and well thought out that video was.
Well, thank you.
Not only did I learn some things, but I was definitely convicted. you really, you know, I have a lot of things that I say in my videos, and I primarily say them to remind myself. And the slow hands thing, when you really made an issue of us slowing our hands down, and I appreciate that. I really do, because we all need to be reminded of that.
Well, thank you.
It's very good for you.
I know part of what we talked about kind of on our pre-phone call, getting to know one another's. We've both done the young colts for the public for a long, long time, and one of the most frustrating parts of that for me is that I'll have this colt doing pretty nice, and then the owner comes to ride him, and they get on him and grab a hold of him, and in 5 seconds they've got him braced up. You're just kind of like, what the hell, man? I mean, like, it's all downhill now. I mean,
yeah.
Just slow down, folks.
That's the tightrope we walk, right? On the one hand, we want to be horsemen, but on the other hand, we've got to prepare these horses for the people that are going to be riding them. And that's an art form in itself.
Yes, sir. It's really a different skill entirely. I think it really is. Let's jump back into the skateboarding. I kind of want to hear a little bit more about that.
Okay.
So are we talking half pipes or skate parks or all of it or what?
Well, I wasn't a half pipe guy. Even though I did build a couple of ramps, I sort of dabbled in that, but primarily I was a street skater. What I did was we started in Okeechobee, and there wasn't a lot of, there's not even a lot of pavement in Okeechobee. So we just skateboard up and down the sidewalks and stuff. And then when I went to California, I got pretty serious about it, because I made some friends that were real serious about it. And there's a lot of pavement out there. There's a lot of terrain. And so I never got into the big time air stuff. It was mostly street skating, but I had a lot of fun with it. I still have some friends that do it to this day, and some couple of guys in particular that made a lot of money skateboarding in there, yeah.
So did you do the baggy pants and the whole culture of it and everything, or were you skateboarding in Wranglers, or how did that work out?
No, not Wranglers. We weren't. I guess we did have some baggy pants back in those days, but it's not like it is now. No, I was pretty conservative in my dress, I'd say.
So this is a little off topic, but do you follow Jordan Peterson at all, or are you a fan of his stuff?
Absolutely, yeah.
So
yeah.
I love the quote of his about not bothering kids doing dangerous things carefully. And I think sort of that skateboarding is part of that. They need to go get scuffed up a little bit and a scar or two and feel a little pain and pick themselves up and do it again. And there seems to be a distinct lack of that in the world nowadays. And I kind of wish we could turn the clock back. They're way too much into a phone and not near enough outside in the sunshine,
I couldn't agree more. I saw somewhere, I think I watched a TED Talk, and I want to say it was Rodney Mullen, and I don't know if that name means anything to you, but Rodney was an icon in the skateboarding industry and was just an amazing guy. And he pointed out that you can't be a successful skateboarder without failing a lot every day. It's just it's just failure over and over and over again until you achieve a trick. That's what skateboarders do, is they do tricks. And you have to learn how to hit the ground, and it's the pavement. It's not sand or dirt like like in what we do now. It's pavement. And I've got a lot of injuries and aches and pains and stuff from cowboying, but I would imagine that most of the things that bother me when I get out of bed in the morning stem from skateboarding.
So it does seem to me, and from watching some of your videos that you've got, you get into working cows and handling ropes and those sorts of things as much as you do horses, or maybe not as much, but you get into that a fair bit. And I would say there's a huge lack of that in the world for some young man or young lady out there that really kind of wanted to learn about cowboying and how you might go about doctoring a calf or something like that. If they were to look for resources where to learn that, they'd have an uphill battle. I know like 310 Ranch Life is doing a good bit of that kind of stuff right now and all, but I really appreciate the content that you have that way. So how would you sort of define yourself in terms of percentage of like being a cowman or a horseman? Because those aren't necessarily the same thing.
Well, I hope that I try to be 50-50. To be honest with you, Daniel, I probably wouldn't have a whole heck of a lot to do with a horse if it wasn't for cattle. Like I said, and don't take that the wrong way. I mean, I have a deep connection with my horses, and it seems like the older I get, the more I learn, the deeper that connection gets. But my love of being a cowboy and a cowman is still and so, when I started out, like I said before, I didn't start out to be a horseman. I started out to be a cowboy, and I always considered knowing cattle and understanding the cow business as a whole was a huge part of that. And so, I spend my summers attending to yearlings in Colorado. And so, a fellow's and I've worked cow-calf outfits. I managed a cow-calf outfit out in Buffalo, Wyoming for a while. And I worked for the University of Georgia, where we did quite a bit of, we had a herd of mama cows, and I learned a lot about cattle and genetics and reproduction and grazing and all that sort of thing there. And so I'd say that I don't think that the cattle side of it is as deep a rabbit hole as horsemanship is. In fact, I know it's not. Mm-hmm. A fella can learn most everything that he needs to know about cattle, in a few seasons, in a particular industry. In other words, if you want to learn everything that there is to know about cow-calf operation, you could go to work for a decent size outfit. And as long as you're applying yourself mentally to the industry, then you're going to learn everything in just a few years. Everything you need to know to be, proficient with it. And the same with stockers. But horsemanship, I don't think that I'll ever hit the bottom of that hole,
I do know what you mean. And I've done a lot of background in yearlings too. That might be my favorite thing to do. I enjoy that tremendously. I think it's so good for a horse. Like, you can doctor yearlings for a month, go prowling around on a colt, and that sucker's ready to do whatever you might want to do from then on. Yeah. I can. That's a zen state for me. I could just prowl yearlings forever, and I think I would be perfectly happy with that.
That's all I want to do. That's all. That at the end of the day, that's all I want to do. Hang out with my kid and go doctor yearlings.
So here's a question I've got for you. Like, you seem to come at a lot of this stuff from the high adrenaline side of things. So it's skateboarding and bucking horses and all of that. And so would you say there's been a change in you, maybe a maturing over time or something? Because if you're high adrenaline doctor in yearlings, you probably won't have a job but for about a week or something like that. And the man that owns the cattle you're running around the pasture is probably going to send you packing pretty quick. So those things don't necessarily jive, I guess is what I'm getting at. So how would you say your evolution, or were you, I guess I'm making an assumption here that might be false, because in my experience, a lot of the rodeo guys that ride bucking horses, I don't necessarily want them in my round pen because they're going to make sure they have a lot of fun, which may not be the best thing for the colt that we're being paid to deal with here, So I would say there's a reason, in my opinion, there's a reasonably low percentage of those guys that convert into pretty good horsemen on the other side. Sometimes they stay with the, I want to ride wild stuff a little too long, and their motivations to feed that, not to do the horse part. So I don't. That's a very poorly asked question, but I think you understand what I'm getting at. How did you evolve there?
I wouldn't really say that I get an adrenaline rush from skateboarding or riding bucking horses per se. Maybe I do. I feel like I've always been really good at controlling that. To be honest with you, I get much more adrenaline or much more excited or nervous having interactions with people than I do with, things that are considered to be, high adrenaline activities. I think it was probably to my detriment that I didn't get excited about riding bucking horses. That's why I didn't really have a huge career with it. I would almost get sort of, you were saying Zen state earlier. That's kind of where I would go with it.
I was just going to say, again, I think we're kind of similar. Like I rode bulls when I was in my late teens and early 20s, and I honestly had more fun at the practices than I did at the rodeos, because at the practice I could get on 5. At the rodeo, right, you got your one shot, and if there's a short go or whatever, you may get to ride again, but by and large you drove 3 hours to be there for a few seconds and then go home. And at the practice I could keep pumping a little money into it, and I could ride as much as I wanted. And that was the part I liked. It wasn't the lights and the crowds, it was the getting to climb on one and do my thing, so
yeah, I think that's why. Yeah, I was the same. It was the challenge of getting good at something that's extremely difficult that attracted me to it. I think that, and the romantic side of it, the image side of it. I really, the aesthetic part of riding bucking horses and skateboarding. Really, I've always appreciated that. And so, but I think that, maybe I'm a little dull-minded. I think that's probably the case because, like I said, I don't get real excited. And that, I think that, well, I know that helps me with young horses and with yearlings too. A fella can't ride into 1,000 head of yearlings and have his adrenaline pumping and get his job done efficiently. You're just not going to do it. The cattle are going to read, your horse is going to read you first of all, and then the cattle are going to read that, and you're never going to get your loop on a sick calf if you're riding around, with your blood pumping.
I completely agree. So you mentioned a little bit about the people side, and you obviously are trending that way in your career. You're now doing a lot more teaching of people than of horses. And in our conversation on the phone, you'd mentioned you were wanting to get more into clinics and those sorts of things. And I just wanted to tell you, you're not nearly alone. Every clinician I know pretty much got into this business to get away from people and to just go play with horses. And then all of a sudden, 30 years later, you realize that this is a people business, not a horse business. And now you feel like you're starting at the bottom again, having to figure out the people side of this thing instead of the horse side of it. So do you have some thoughts on that, or you want to share some plans or some goals with us on the people side of this thing?
That was one thing that surprised me about getting out of that's why I went into ranching, really. I mean, aside from from loving the lifestyle and the livestock, I just like being isolated. Always have. And you'll run into a lot of guys that ranch for a living that are that way. They're just antisocial. But the more I get into what I'm doing now, the more I am surprised at how much I really enjoy helping people and seeing the light bulb come on with them. Maybe that's maturity on my part, or maybe it's just the fact that I never really explored that part, to see the light bulb come on with some of these clients that I've got. And I deal with some that are kind of handy. A lot of my clients are, now I'm talking about the people that I interact with face to face, like doing lessons and clinics and that sort of thing. And some of these folks are pretty good, but some of them, as you well know, really probably don't have any business being on a horse outside of an arena where there's someone there to help them. Some of these folks have just got cojones that they'd have to carry in a wheelbarrow because the horses that they're riding are completely out of control and they don't have the skills to control that horse. It never ceases to amaze me, some of the situations that they get themselves into just because they want it so bad. And to help those people, to give someone that already has a foundation of knowledge, they've got a seat, they've got some hands, and their horse is reasonably broke, to give them a little nugget of knowledge is great. They'll take that and they'll move forward. But to take a person that barely knows what in the hay goes in and that for that horse, when you can take that person and see the light bulb come on with them and see the joy that they have to finally understand something about that horse, that's almost as good as seeing the light bulb come on in one of those colts that you've been hammering on for, 6 weeks trying to teach it some basic element. You just get goosebumps from it. I do. I find myself constantly telling these people to put their hands down, let go of that horse and put their hands down and let their horse relax. I'm huge on that. I was raised up. I got my start in cutting, and the guy that gave me my start wouldn't even let me use a snaffle bit. I had to ride everything in one of those grass rope hackamores because I had a seat like a saddle bronc rider. I had no hands, and he recognized that, and it was the best thing he ever did for me. And he was constantly yelling at me to get out of my horse's way or put my hands down or whatever. And so I just continue that. It helped me so much that I give that to my clients now, and it's amazing. You just see these old horses, they just take these big deep breaths and they drop their old head down, and they go from being the riders too. Once they understand that they can trust their horse and that they don't have to use those reins to balance off of, man, it just makes all the difference. And it's amazing to watch. I love that part of it.
I completely agree. I love when it's probably my favorite kind of customer is the lady that shows up at a clinic on Saturday and she's got a horse that's a little spoiled and she won't take a hold of him or anything like that. You kind of give her permission and show her a couple of things. And by like Sunday afternoon, you're having to go, okay, easy now. You're scaring him a little bit. They've grown so much in that short period of time. Now you're like, all right, you found the other side of the road. Now we need to back off a little and kind of stay in the middle here. Okay. One thing I wanted to ask you about, like I appreciate this a lot from watching some of your videos and stuff. I'm pretty big on the safety aspect of all of this. And I see people teaching things a lot that are not real safe. They're maybe standing in the wrong place where if they were with the wrong kind of horse, they would be a victim here in just a second and things like that. And I kind of think that the only way to get to that spot is kind of through that road of hard knocks where you deal with some of those horses and you realize what a horse in a bad spot can do and how you have to handle that safely or you're going to put yourself in a bad spot. I find that would be one of my biggest pet peeves with the industry is that the safety side of that stuff is not addressed well enough. And thus we wind up with people that build habits that are not going to serve them well necessarily. So why don't you tell us some of your thoughts on the safety aspect of that, and I guess if you agree with me there, was it more the school of hard knocks that taught you that stuff, or do you kind of have something you're following there that was pre-designed, or what?
Give me an example of exactly what we're talking about.
So like just to go to get on a horse, whether you're standing too far back at his flank or something
Oh,
like that, the way you're handling reins or
right.
picking up feet or even saddling them. I've seen a bunch of people, they'll go to grab the rear girth and they put their face right down there where if that horse kicked at a fly, they're going to get tagged in the forehead by a back hoof. Just a lot of the little things kind of walking around a horse that could get you in a bind if you're not aware of them or if you're lax on some of that stuff.
If you could list out all of the things that a horse could do to you to hurt you, all that's happened to me, as I'm sure it's happened to you. Kicked, bit, flipped over on, run over, stepped on, all of those things, pawed down. They've all happened to me. And so I've learned a lot of that through, like you say, the school of hard knocks. But at the same time, I'm very observant in the context of teaching, creating videos or teaching one-on-one. For me to put content out there that's teaching folks unsafe ways to do things, and there is no real safe way to be around a horse. There really isn't. But that wouldn't be the proper thing to do. And so it could be that you and I do things when we're around a horse, we do 90% of what we do unconsciously, just because we've been doing it for so long. And what I try to do is I try to bring those things that folks, there just isn't a lot of, like you said before. So I'm talking myself into a circle here. My mind operates like that sometimes, but there's not a lot of information out there that's genuine for folks to really get safe around their horse. And going all the way back to where people started making, all the way back to Xenophon. I mean, we talk about the Greeks. I mean, I don't know if you've ever read Xenophon's book on horsemanship, but he talks about a lot of these safety things, and you just don't even see in modern videos, you don't see a lot of folks that are giving you genuine, safe handling practices around these horses. And so, the way you put the saddle on, where you stand to saddle the horse, especially a young horse, the way you stand and mount a horse, especially a young horse. I do it on all of them because all I mostly do is ride young horses, but I really want to bring those things to people that aren't common knowledge, the safety aspects that aren't common knowledge. And unless you've been around a lot of waspy colts, you may not know these things.
So
I hope
brings
I answered your question, Daniel. I hope that did. I'm not even sure if I answered your question, but
no.
I feel, I think it's super important that folks are genuine. And another thing about that, if I find out that there's a better way of doing something, I'll make a video about it and I'll put it back out there. And I'll say, look, guys, I used to do it this way, but I learned that this is actually a better method for me. And it's constantly evolving. And so if I don't bring those things to my customers, then I'm not doing the right thing.
I think that speaks to the genuine nature of what you're talking about. I mean, if you're still doing everything the same way you did it 10 years ago, either your ego won't allow you to be wrong or you hadn't learned a dang thing. And I don't think either of those is very good. So, you have to be kind of evolving. And if you don't contradict yourself at some point, then you're just not learning.
Yeah.
So being a former, or I don't know if you're ever a former, but a Florida cracker, and we're talking about safety, I'm assuming you've done some popping of a whip off of a horse, and that is one of those kind of a lost art sort of thing. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Do you have do you still use a whip? Do you go to Colorado with a whip, and do you have a particular type of whip that you like, and some tips about using a whip off of a horse or not using a whip off of a horse? What are your thoughts on whips and horses?
Well, I don't really use them anymore. I do have a couple of whips. I have one my dad gave me. My dad had two nylon whips platted when I was 10. So that would have been in 1981 or 82. He had these two whips made by this old gentleman down in, he lived in a little town called Yeehaw Junction, just north of Okeechobee there. And I've still got mine. And then when my dad passed, I got his. So I've got both of those whips now. And they're just kind of, I don't use them anymore. Not that I disagree with them or whatever, not at all, because man, they can be super handy, but I pack a 60-foot rope. And so I don't really have a place to put a whip on my saddle anymore. I like to use a dog around cattle. And so the whip, down there in Florida, you just about have to have a whip, because I don't know if, well, I'm sure you've got to be familiar with you got to know the reputation of Florida that cattle have that come out of Florida. If you don't have a big pack of cur dogs and a cow whip, you're just not going to get a lot done with them. And whether that's, whether those cattle are created by the cracker cowboys or whether they're that way naturally, it doesn't, regardless, the reality is that a cow whip is one of those things that's just sort of a necessity. But as far as getting a whip around a horse, I don't do it anymore. I don't crack I used to, just because it was fun, but it's not difficult. I've never once had a horse. I have horses that are more afraid of a rope swinging around them than a cow whip. Never had a problem with a horse that, cracking a cow whip or anything like that. So some of these cutters now, I haven't really gotten into some of these real stingy cutters, and started swinging a whip around them. That might be a little different story, but generally, if you take your time with it and obviously practice on the ground, because you can do some damage both to yourself and the horse if you don't know how to swing that thing properly. But if you take your time and introduce it to them slowly and let the pressure off when they give you the signal, and then you're not going to have too much trouble with the whips.
I think, Richard, it's about time I'm going to have to pay the bills here and get into our episode sponsor. And
Okay.
In order of your heritage and location over there, I reached out and I found one that I think was just perfect for this episode. So our sponsor today is Floralina Squat Conversions. You've heard of Western Hauler and the custom mods that they do to horse hauling trucks. Well, the East Coasters have our own needs, and Floralina Squat Conversions is here for the discerning horsemen and horsewomen of the Southeast. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know that the preferred method of hauling a horse trailer worth more than your first house is with your truck's front end way up in the air. We want those other drivers to appreciate just how heavy our haul is. We also want to see over the hood. Your prayers have been answered. Floralina Squat Conversions patented new air ride wedge seats lifts you up when your tail is down. The driver's seat in particular can raise up in the back at least 18 inches, meaning you can drive in style and still see for miles. Our entire suspension system is highly adjustable and hydraulically controlled. Let's just say that your converted truck will excel at squatting on the front and back. So if you head to the Southwest, you can also roll low and slow like the world's largest El Camino. You might be wondering, but beyond hydraulic suspension and well thought out seat design, what makes Floralina Conversion special? Ladies and gentlemen, if you've ever lived in the Southeast, you know that hurricane evacuations can be fraught with problems and gridlocked roads. With the advent of all these EV vehicles that die on those roads, what is a stylish horse person to do when trying to get their ponies to safe ground? Well, our patent-pending battery burst and brush guard is the solution of the future. Simply drive right up on the bumper of a stalled EV and give them a good bump with the optional battery burst and brush guard. Your alternator will send a pulse of electricity into their car and override all of their signals. The result is that dead EV will have just enough juice and the command to drive right into the ditch, out of the way of all those people trying to get to safety. Let me tell you also that if you need this as a more traditional brush guard, that mad mama cow won't charge your truck a second time after getting a pulse made for an EV. Floralina Squat Conversions. Ride in style while seeing for miles. All right. So we've paid the bills on this episode now. Well, so let's talk cattle a little bit more.
Okay.
One of the my wife is in the room here with me, so I have to be careful how I phrase this. But we raise and show Brahma cattle, and her background with showing Brahma cattle and my background with trying to ride around them with a horse in a large pasture, we have kind of different opinions of what Brahma cattle are like. So I'm wondering if y'all have a lot of that influence over there, or if it's become more of an English cow world. And then when you're going to Colorado and working on yearlings over there, do you see a lot of that sort of thing? And then I wanted to tie that in with the cutting and the cow horse world in a little different way also. So what kind of cattle are you seeing in your part of the world?
They're mostly English cattle. We'll see a lot of cattle with ear, but those cattle are discounted pretty heavily, in our part of the country. Obviously, Florida is real heavy on the indica cattle. It's funny when you say Brahma. When I was a kid, we call them Bramers, and you probably heard that before.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was a kid, the first time I heard someone say Brahman cattle, so the football team in Okeechobee are the Bramers. The junior high team is the yearlings. If that gives you an idea what the culture is like down there. But the first time I heard someone call it a Brahmin when I was a lot older, I was like, "What are you talking about? What the heck is a Brahmin? I never heard of a Brahmin cow, But even down in Florida, I mean, there's a lot of Angus seed stock operations down there now. I don't remember when I was a kid, all of the cattle that I saw when I was a kid, they were all brush cattle, cracker cattle, which is it's like a cross between they'd take these sort of Spanish type cattle, Longhorn or Coriani type cows. I mean, they're a little fleshier and a little framier than what you see now in Spanish cattle, but then they'd put Bremer bulls on them. And so a lot of the calves would come out of there with horn and ears and a lot of leather and stuff like that. Like Creek Plantation is an interesting story because if you were to go and look at their herd now, it's all black commercial cattle. And they use all sort of Gardner influenced bulls, over those cows. But that whole herd was started with 300 straight gray Bramer heifers that came out of Arcadia, Florida, covered by Longhorn bulls. And occasionally you'll see a little skunk-tailed cow or some horns show up on a calf now and then in Creek cattle, and it's all those genetics. They bred them for the last, 45 years under those black bulls and bred all of that, that original herd out of there. There's no ear or anything left on them, which is kind of a neat story. But yeah, we don't see, like I said, we can get, I used to, what plain cattle are? What guys call plain cattle?
No, sir.
It's just, it's like anything. It'll be anything, but it won't be like if you're at the sale barn and you put in an order for plain cattle. My understanding of it would be cattle that don't really fall into any real category. They won't be Holsteins and they won't be Longhorns or roping cattle, but they'll be anything else. They won't be number ones or twos. They're typically going to be below a number two quality, but we'll see those eared cattle show up in that plain cattle category. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they're heavily discounted.
Well, I do think that the cattle industry has done a lot of evolving on its own in the last 20 or 30 years. Like you're mentioning about these Angus cattle. I think that the marketing program of certified Angus beef has probably had a greater effect on the cattle industry than dewormer has in the last 50 years or something. A lot of people don't realize, but that certified Angus beef label, I think what has to happen and there's probably a little more to it than what I'm about to say, but they can't show too many Brahman characteristics. The carcass has to be, or the hide has to be more than 51% black. And that's one of the big grading deals at a slaughter plant for them to yield or to grade as certified Angus beef. And so certified Angus beef label in no way guarantees that there's any Angus in the animal that you're about to eat whatsoever, but they were predominantly black for sure. And so we've seen, like, even in the Simmental world, which used to have 4 or 5 colors, and the beef masters and all of them are black now. You go to the shows and all of that stuff, and you can't find the brindles and the lemons and all of these things that you're used to seeing in these breeds, and now they're all black, trying to look like the Angus. I think it's just it's permeated throughout the whole industry. They started aiming for that thing so much. It's really kind of been a game changer in the cattle world.
Yeah. Can I tell you a funny story?
Absolutely.
So when I was up there in Wyoming, this was in 2011 or 2012, somewhere around in there. There was a bad drought down in the Southwest, particularly North and West Texas. And people, the cow market down there went into the toilet, and they were selling off cattle left and right. And so the guy that I worked for out there that owned the ranch said that he'd like to go down there or send a rep down there to buy some of those cattle and bring them up to our part of the country. I said, okay, I didn't really have a problem with that. I mean, a lot of folks would say, well, the climate's so different, that'll be really hard on those cattle, but it's really not. You're actually it's a lot harder on cattle to take them from northern country to the south than it is to take southern cattle to the north. A lot of folks don't know that, but that's the way I understand it. Anyway, we sent a guy down there to around San Angelo to get us 3 load of mama cows, and he fell on some Herefords, and we were primarily running black cattle. In fact, they were some of the cattle up there were registered Angus, but he could get a really good deal on these Hereford cattle, and so we said, sure, go ahead and send them up. Well, he sent them on up, and some of them were pairs, and some of them, well, let's see. Let me back up here for a second. They were all pairs, and they were all bred, supposedly. All the calves that came on these cows were straight Herefords. But we didn't realize it until they started calving that they've been bred to Bremer bulls. And so we had a bunch of F1 Hereford Bremer cross calves hitting the ground. These things they got ear like this and leather hanging all over them, and they're striped, some of them. And buddy, our neighbors had a field day with that. That was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Here we are, 6,000 foot elevation up there in the winter country, and we're having a bunch of F1 Bremer Hereford cross calves hitting the ground. But I will say this, those calves were some of the best performing calves that we raised that year. We got laughed at until we ran those calves across the scale. So.
Well, I'll say that, like with my kids, we're down here in South Louisiana, and Brahma cattle are really big down here. One of the things that they can win at the state fair is a trip to Louisville, Kentucky, to one of these big international livestock shows up there. And when all these Louisiana kids haul their Brahmas up there, most of those people have never seen one. They don't have any idea what that thing is. We've had people come by and ask, is that some kind of camel, or all kind of weird stuff. And like, I guess it's like the alligators. I mean, this is just normal, but other people, this is something very, very different. So anyway,
yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk about this, but I was going to ask you a little bit about your family. You got a picture of your family there on your website and everything. So, is your wife involved in the business side of this, or is she doing her own thing? And then you said you've got a couple of kids that are kind of interested in horses. Are they coming up in this with you, or what does the family side of all this look like for you?
Well, my wife is definitely involved. She's she's the linchpin in the whole B1 deal. Without her, there's no way it would even exist. She's good with computers, and she's very smart, and And I don't just say that just to gain favor with her. She's really, really good. All the stuff that you see is she's had a hand in all of it. She's not so much into horses. Technically, my best using horse belongs to her, but she loans him to me on a regular basis. She's only ridden him a few times, but my kid, she's just so busy. You know how it is. My kids, I've never been one to really push what I'm interested in onto my kids, but they do ride. All of them ride. My son's he's pretty good with a rope, and he's got him a little cutting horse that treats him pretty good. And my daughter, Caroline, I've got two at home still. See, I've got an older daughter. My oldest is, gosh, I guess she's 28 now. And she's got my 3 grandkids. And then my second daughter just turned 21, and she's off at school basically. And so I've still got the 2 at home. And the first 2 rode a good bit as they were growing up. And the second 2 come to the barn twice a week. They're homeschooled, so they come twice a week and ride and help with everything. But like I said, I don't really push it on them. And we don't show. I've never really been much of a showman. Much prefer to stay at home. So we didn't really raise them up in that environment. And so they don't really have goals and things they're working towards with their horses. It's really just, I just want them to enjoy it, Mm-hmm. And I feel like if it had been pushed on me by my parents when I was a kid, we just got to ride. Our horses were just there for us to use. We could do whatever we want. We actually would get on our horses and ride all over the place. They were our transportation when I was a kid. And so I don't want to, I guess you could say I don't want to make it a job for them. If they decide to go into the horse business or have horses or whatever, when they get out there and into the world, then that's entirely up to them. That's the way I want to leave it,
I agree more. I want to make it available to my kids, but I don't want to push my dreams on them. They get to have their own dreams and their own directions and all of that stuff. So at the same time, we do live on a ranch, so they need to know enough to not get killed when they're around. That's one of these things I see with some other parents and their kids. Like, I'm a pretty strict dad, but that's because when I say no, stop, like that might mean they just walked up behind a horse they really didn't need to, and like they need to obey that command right here and now, or it could be a life and death situation. It astounds me, some of the parenting I see. I'm like, that kid would be dead in about 3 hours on my place because he doesn't listen at all. What about the 3 grandkids?
No, we've never really been into the pony. I'm not a pony guy. I'd rather have a nice broke quarter horse for them, and we have a few of them. They're not really big enough to ride yet. They've all come out and got to pet the horses and that sort of thing. But when they're ready, all they have to do is ask Padre to go ride, and you bet I'll take them. One thing I wanted to say, I just wanted to brag on my kids, since there's going to be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people watching this. I'd love to be able to let the world know just how handy my kids are. No, but they're super handy. I love taking my kids to do things because they grew up, all of them grew up sort of riding and working cattle, and they're unconsciously good with it. And I love taking them to Colorado, and they know how to handle yearlings, and I've worked with a lot of cowboys that I'd choose my kids over some of the guys that I worked with over the years, for sure, just because they're quieter, handier, and just more proficient, with being around horses and cattle. That's really fun. I love that part of it.
It's a great moment as a dad to see your kids. You get to those moments where you're about to say you need to, and then they do it without being told, and you realize they've got it now. Like they've hit that level of competence, and it's that's a wonderful moment as a dad to watch when your kids can, when they're handling it. It really is.
Yeah, my second daughter, one time we were grazing yearlings, and we had a big bunch of heifers get mixed in with a big bunch of steers, and that's a wreck. And we sorted them, and we had to trail the heifers or the steer. I can't remember. We had to trail one of the groups a couple of miles to get them away. Put a few fences in between the two groups, and we're trying to trail them. And I see my daughter over there about 300 yards off, and she's working these two calves up and down the fence, and I'm yelling at her, like a moron. And what are you doing? What are you doing? And she yells back at me, Dad, there's a steer right here that she's over there trying to sort the steer off. And I'm yelling at her to put those two in the group and come on, quit jacking around, and she's over there trying to sort the steer out of the group of heifers. So I was like, okay, my bad. I'll just shut up. And she goes over there, she cuts them out, puts the steer back where he's supposed to be and pushes the heifer or whatever it was, so that'll make you proud and feel stupid at the same time.
Well, that's all part of it. I like it. Now that you're kind of full force into B1 horsemanship and you're wanting to do some clinics, why don't you tell us a little bit about what your offerings are there and how y'all are aiming to serve the public?
We have the membership site where, excuse me, we try to provide as much value there as we possibly can. We upload a new video every week, sometimes 2 a week. I feel like I need to be providing fresh content. One, to keep people engaged. I don't want the content to get stale. And two, like I was saying before, I'm on a journey that's I'm constantly evolving. And so all of the new things, even though I may not vocalize it in a particular video, the things that I do change from time to time. And so I want to keep it fresh and keep it going. And so we're real proactive about staying engaged with our members, creating new content, and growing B1 and really serving that community. And then I've never been much of a clinician. I've spent my whole career doing ranch work, which I love dearly. So I never really, I've done a few, I've probably done a dozen clinics throughout my entire career. But we're trying to grow that side of it because, well, it's just sort of a natural thing. It just sort of goes hand in hand with what we're doing with the video. And I've found that there is a demand for it. Although we don't really know how big the demand is right now. We're trying to expand it out a little bit. And there's a lot of, it's kind of a tricky deal. You try to balance providing the clinic opportunity to the people and making it a good financial value for them. And then at the same time, not go broke while you're doing it. So I'm figuring all that stuff out currently. I always wanted to be, we've talked about being genuine already. And I've had opportunities to become a clinician. I'm doing air quotes, clinician in the past. And you and I both know that that's a career in itself. Some guys choose the clinician path from day one, but I never felt like I was qualified to be a clinician until I paid my dues in the real world. Does that make sense?
100%.
Even, yeah. I couldn't do it. Like I said, I had a few opportunities, but I just didn't jump on that train because I wanted to be able to give people, I wanted to be able to help them in a true and honest fashion and give them things that I knew to be facts, not stuff that I had, been taught or learned from someone else through word of mouth per se, or by reading a book or whatever. And so that genuine aspect had to be there for me. I feel like I'm there now, at the age of 52, I think I can really, bring that value to folks. And so we're trying to grow that side of it.
So I know exactly what you mean there. I'll have to say I'm sometimes disheartened when I travel places like expos and things like that. Sometimes I'm a little shocked at how green some of the other presenters are in terms of what they're delivering and some of the things that they're saying that they should know better, like the safety stuff of, they're standing in a spot that I know they shouldn't be standing in. You need to be 6 inches to the right. You can't get pawed, but they're standing right there where they ought not be. And I'm like, you're demonstrating that to 1,000 people right now, and you shouldn't be. You should know better than that. So I know exactly what you mean. And I'll tell you, one of the things I've kind of struggled with is that the crowds of people don't know the difference. I can remember one particular event that I went to that I was emceeing. So I'm the guy on the microphone explaining everything all weekend. And one of the presenters in particular I had heard of before. And when he got out there to ride, I was utterly shocked at how green he was. And the audience clapped for him as loud as anybody else and all of that stuff. And it was really it was a professional slap in the face, I felt like, because it was the first time I realized that they don't recognize the difference in the skill sets. You get to a point where you're better than them, I guess, or more skilled, and they can't tell the difference between a 7 and a 10, I guess. I don't know if that makes it. But yeah. Anyway, no. It was a moment for me. I'll have to say, I was wondering, like, did I practice this 15 years longer than I needed to, and I was actually good enough way back when, or what? Yeah. But I had the same feeling you have, is that I felt like I needed to be at a certain level and have a certain amount of experience and a certain number of horses behind me before I had any business actually trying to convey that to other people. So yeah, I understand your sentiment completely.
Yeah. What we try to do with B1 is, it's unfortunate that folks have to go down the wrong road first. But I'm afraid that that's just the nature of things. You're going to get drawn in by the people who talk the best, or look the people that you can most easily associate with. We all do that. And it's unfortunate that, as dangerous as being around horses is, that people get drawn into folks that really aren't guiding them in the right direction sometimes. Obviously not everybody, but we both know that those guys exist out there. I want B1 to be their haven that they can come to. And a lot of them have already been to that guy or that girl that's not giving them the right information. And they've been down the wrong road, and now they're like, I've got to find something that's legit, or I'm going to have to quit and give it up. And I always want to be one to be the spot to where they almost have to know what else is out there before they appreciate what we're bringing to the table. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good way to look at it. Yes, sir. And I think
I want it to be.
I think you're absolutely right about just the reality of that they almost have to get burned before they start looking for different things. We were just having this discussion with my wife. I've always been a little rebellious in the dress part of this thing. I don't wear anything flashy. I don't have a buckle on. I'm pretty casual about. I'm not there trying to look like I'm trying to play a part. You know what I mean? I'm dressed comfortable and casual, and she's always like, well, you should put on a buckle or something. And I'm like, but that's just not, like, my wedding ring is the only jewelry I wear. I don't put, there's nothing else shiny on me beyond that, and I don't know, maybe there's a cost to be paid for not playing that part of the game, but I'd rather be the part than look like I'm trying to look like the part, so anyway.
Well, you've got to be true to yourself, because I can't in good conscience, if I don't like the way that a video looks, let's back up to the shiny stuff. That's a distraction for folks. I don't want them looking at, my belt buckle or the jewelry that my horse is wearing or whatever. I want them to be focused on the content, for better or for worse. If that means that we don't sell as many, that's okay, because I only want people that are looking for what I've got to offer. You know, I don't, yeah, it may mean a lot more money for us to go down some of those roads, but that's not why we're here. It's just, you know, at the end of the day, that's not why we do what we do. So I don't feel like we'd be helping our clients by trying to distract them with a lot of things that are unnecessary.
I like it.
I guess you do too.
Yeah, I've always said I would much rather have a horse that shines than one that's shiny. So
Yeah, right. Yeah, you bet. Yeah.
I have two things that come to mind off of that, and I guess I'll deal with this one first. So you do seem to be more ranch focused. Do you also work with people that aren't necessarily ranch focused? So like, or would you be open in clinics or in lessons and all having, say, a dressage rider come or an eventer that's having some obstacles type challenges with their horse or something like that? Are you working with those type of people as well, or do you pretty much get strictly the ranch horse crowd or what?
No, I have some dressage riders that come and ride with me, and I don't know that we get them to the website so much, but I do get local folks that ride dressage and do the hunter jumpers. And I have a lady that has a Tennessee Walker, and which ranching's not big where we are, and ranch horse showing is not big where we are. We have a chapter, I guess, of the American Ranch Horse Association,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll do some showing with those folks, but my program's not centered around showing, even though I can certainly help show horses. Trained a good number of them over the years. Started particularly a lot of showing cutters. The thing about what I do, though, is that, and you may have observed this, that what I do doesn't really, even though the principles will cross over into any horse in any discipline, and I feel like any person in any discipline could benefit from what we bring to the table. I'm not going to use the language and the styles and the techniques that are out there within especially in those English disciplines. You know, like I said before, I'm going to be telling those riders to pitch that horse away, get out of his mouth, leave him alone, let him travel, let him relax. We might pick those reins up a little bit later, but you know, and the folks that come and rival with me, and they're all ladies. If someone just comes to me just to have a good time, they're probably not going to come back, because even though I like to have a good time with them, I'm going to be real focused on their horse and helping them help their horse. And I'm going to be, you know, I'm going to hold them accountable. And these English riders are very used to holding on to their horse all the time. I mean, they're wired that way. They've been told to ride with contact, you know, that since they started riding. And that's the first thing for me. I'm saying, look, you know, it's like a billboard that I'm looking at. Your horse is so bound up and so upset about the fact that you've got a hold of that bridle 100% of the time. That's your problem, you know. And they pitch those reins away and their old head comes down. Like I said, they start licking and chewing, and they take these big, deep breaths, and they gather themselves up, and it's just like night and day. And the people always, I don't know how often it sticks when they leave there, because I feel like they think that they have to have a hold of that horse in order to keep control of it. But the sad truth is they really don't have any control. You know that. You know, they feel like holding on to those reins, they've got control of that horse, but they don't. They probably really have more control of that horse by pitching it away and picking up one rein at a time if they need it. I always tell them, you don't use those reins. You only use those reins to correct the horse. You know, you can send a horse in a direction and let him go there. He can go there on his own. He doesn't need you to guide him there. You can just send him there and then correct him if he gets off. And I love to see that light bulb come on in those people and those horses, and the English folks seem to, you know, it's really a clash there. of ideas.
There's a lot of dogma in that world, I find, and when you think to the origin of it, like Xenophon and all, those guys were riding into war with one hand on a sword and maybe a shield on the other and something. So it was never meant to be two hands occupied all the time and in the horse all the time. And they should be the ultimate ranch horses, where you give them responsibility and they're a partner in the task, and not the micromanaged deal that they wind up becoming. But there's some progress. I don't know if you get into the biomechanics, but a lot of that stuff, I'm seeing it have a pretty positive effect in some of those horses. When if you go to an autopsy or something and you see the actual physiological effects of what holding this horse in a certain frame for 20 years did to his back, it's when you see that, it's pretty hard to deny it at that point, so.
Yeah. And it's, the illusion, I talk about this a lot, the illusion of the gentle horse versus the broke horse. Well, it's just that, it's an illusion. Most of your broke horses are going to be gentle, but very few gentle horses are really broke. And that's what I preach to everybody that I do business with, whether it's on video or in person, is that you need to get that horse broke. If you want to be safe, the only way to increase safety is to increase control. Period. That's it. Desensitizing doesn't make you safer, because there's so many horses out there that are desensitized that are still going to get spooked. And the question is not whether or not or when he gets spooked, it's how much control do you have when it happens. I'm big on that. I want them to have control over that horse. That's what it boils down to, because that's what I want. I want, when I get on my horse, I just want to go and enjoy it. And I can't enjoy a horse that when I pick up on my hands, he either gets upset, or when I pick up on my reins, he either gets upset or there's nothing there. And most of those real gentle horses, there's nothing there. They're just dull to it. And the reason they're dull is because they've been trying to communicate with that rider for years, and the rider's not communicating back to them. They're just holding on to those reins. The horse is saying, is this what you want? Is this what you want? And the rider is oblivious to it. And if they're coming to me, they want to get better, which is great. And I hope that I'm the guy to help them. I try real hard to do that. But those horses, it's hard to bring them back from that, because for years they've been attempting to communicate with this person and do what's right, but the rider wouldn't respond to them and release the pressure when the horse was doing the right thing. And so it's hard to bring that horse back and get him to where he is responsive again. We just finished a video series called Softening the Older Horse, because that's what I see as one of the major problems with these horses. It's not in the fact that they're not gentle, it's in the fact that they don't have any control. They're almost too gentle, and gentle is not the right word. They're dull. They don't understand. They're not able to link their brain and their feet back to that snaffle bit or the bridle,
Too many people misunderstand that desensitized and unresponsive are not the same thing. I feel like a lot of these younger trainers, there's kind of a stage that you go through where you learn how to desensitize a horse and you become pretty impressed with yourself. Like one of my pet peeves is the standing up in the saddle stuff, and maybe we crack a bullwhip up there or whatever. And like, I could probably do that on a colt on the first day in another 30 or 45 minutes or something. That in no way means that this horse is ready for anybody to climb on and ride around. We don't have that control that you're talking about. It just means that you got him where he could tolerate this little thing for a little bit. And that, the way that I've always thought about it is that broke is the horse that'll still be responsive, even when the other bad things are happening. It's not that he's desensitized, it's that he is sensitized and he still obeys the cues, even though this chaos is happening all around. That's kind of how I define a broke horse. I think we get way too wrapped up in the desensitizing and take it to an extreme that it really almost ruins the horse, just like you're saying. They just get dull to everything. And that horse is really, I call it turtling. It's like they just withdraw into their shell and they're oblivious to the world around them. And that's not my goal in any way, shape, or form. One thing you said a minute ago that I absolutely loved, you brought up about just riding that horse one rein at a time. And I think that's one of the biggest secrets to getting along with a lot of these horses. In my business, I have rehabbed a lot of older horses, kind of like you were talking about, softening the older horse. And I'm amazed at some of the performance horses. I mean, like second and third level dressage horses, reining horses that have won a bunch of money, and you get on them and ride them forward and pick up on one rein, and they have no bend in them whatsoever. And I'm just thinking, like, how the hell did they ride this thing at all? I mean, we've missed kindergarten here. How did we get to high school or college when kindergarten didn't happen? Like, I mean, that's where all the problems with this horse are. So you run into that sort of stuff a lot?
Yeah, constantly. I mean, it doesn't stop. In fact, and maybe I'm just a snob about it, but I only like to ride the horses that I've broke trained, because they have the feel that I like. I don't know how else to say that. And getting those, you really almost have to. Well, just put yourself in the horse's shoes. Say you're a horse that's 12, 13 years old, and you've been ridden all of your life by a person that's not empathetic towards your needs, what you're feeling. And so, man, I'm going to struggle to get this out, but, and so you've sort of gotten along in life by being dull and more or less ignoring that person and letting them sort of drag, that's what folks do, is they just sort of drag their horses around, because the horse isn't responding to their cues. The horse is just.
Well, folks, I'm sorry. We're having some storms in my area and I lost internet there. So we may have a little awkward gap here, but Richard, we were basically starting to get a little more philosophical about horses and all of that. And we've talked a little bit about a few of the rehab things of older horses and all. Why don't we get into colts a little bit? What's kind of your philosophy and some of your aims and goals when starting colts? And I know you had a recent video that kicked a little bit of a hornet's nest. If you want to get into that, tell us your thoughts on starting colts.
Well, aside from safety, obviously, nobody wants an unsafe horse. I really look for I want my action, my responses from that horse to be natural. Forgive me, I don't really exactly remember what we recorded and what we didn't, but just to kind of recap, when a horse turns around, if he's standing in the pasture and he needs to turn around and go get a drink of water, if you observe the horse, or I'm sure you folks that have been around horses, I mean, you can just see this in your mind's eye. The way that horse would turn itself around would be, first thing he would do is he'd flick his ear. If he's going to turn to the left, he's going to drop that left ear or turn it backwards. He's going to look with his eyes. He's going to start to turn his head, right? Tip his nose that direction. He'll bend at the pole. Both axis and axle will flex. He'll bend his neck. He'll balance his weight back towards his rear end. He won't, depending on his conformation and his natural abilities, he may shift all of his weight to his rear end. He may only shift the majority of his weight, but he will shift some weight to his rear end. And then he'll step with that inside foot to the left first and follow with the outside foot. And then he'll just finish that turn as he goes around. There won't be any stiffness. His head won't necessarily come up. He won't cock his neck to his nose to the right and drop his pole, it'll be a very natural, very smooth motion. And so that's what my aim is, to get that out of the horse while carrying my weight. So if I can get that, if he'll turn around like that to me, for me, when I lift on my left rein with my snaffle bit, if I can get him to turn around that way, then I know that I have effectively communicated what I want him to do. And if you think about that, that's really the only way that you know that you have effectively, truly communicated to that horse, hey, I want to go to the left. And you have made your thought his thought, right? And that was Ray Hunter, one of the Dorrance brothers, that said that. I can't remember, but they said that my goal is I want my thought to become the horse's thought. So if you take that all the way down to its fundamental element, the only way that you truly know that your thought has become the horse's thought is if the horse does what you're asking in the way that God designed him to do it. Right? If he keeps himself perfectly straight and turns around to the left, well, that's not natural. If he cocks his head to the right or throws his head up in the air and twists his pole and swings his rear end around his front end to change direction, well, that's not natural. But those are typically the two ways that we see horses turning around. And yes, it's functional. We can get a job done turning a horse like that. And it could even be that the show industry that horse has to perform in needs to look that way. But for me personally, I want to get so deep into that horse's psyche that he understands what I'm asking him to do at a level that's so fundamental, he just does it, and it's just his natural thing. Now, that's a lofty goal. It takes a lot of field timing and balance, and it takes a lot of muscle development to get a horse to do that, because a horse doing that on his own with no saddle is one thing, but getting a horse to do that while he's packing my fat butt along with my saddle and also having the distraction of the snaffle bit in his mouth, that's something entirely different. And so it takes a lot of, like I said, field timing and balance. It takes a lot of repetition, and it takes a lot of muscle and some skeletal development, I'm sure, in order to carry my weight and still do that naturally. I can get it done with most young horses in a year, give or take, and get that horse to where I am confident that when I slide my hand down that rein and he feels that snaffle bit contact the opposite side of his mouth, and he feels my weight, my posture shifts to turn, and he's got all these pre-cues or pre-signals. When I get all of that, then he understands exactly what I'm asking, and I'm not manufacturing anything in him. And he does it at the best of his ability in a natural fashion. Now, that may be getting way too philosophical, man. That may be going down a hole that's too deep. It's not really necessary to get that. But I feel like I need to set my goals to be that high, even if I never actually reach that, that level of communication. Because like I said, that's the way that that you're truly communicating with that horse, is if he just does it naturally. If it were his thought, how would he do it, right? If he wanted to turn around, how would that look? And that's what I shoot for. So my whole program is based around getting that. And it's not just the turn, but the turn is the hardest thing to get, in my opinion. The stop, if you watch a horse stop, unless they're just like, I've only had a few horses that are like born dyed-in-the-wool cutters. I had a horse a few years ago named Creek's Ray. He was a dual ray out of a cat mare named Kittens. Kittens was one heck of a mare. She's still alive, but I don't think she's reproducing anymore. But this horse, God put Creek's Ray on planet Earth to cut cattle. And the reason that I know that is because the day that he hit the ground, he was drawing back on his hocks to turn around and dropping his head down. And it was just a natural thing. And when I started him, I always said that it was my goal to not screw that horse up. And I hope that he didn't. He did end up making it to the cutting horse futurity. He drew a really bad cow in the first round and ended up marking like a 206 or something. And it wasn't enough to get him to the second round, but unbelievable horse, But aside from him, I feel like I've had to train that. And when I say train, I don't mean teach necessarily, but it's almost like a sculptor. I can't remember which sculptor it was that said that, well, when I'm creating a sculpture, all I do is I chip away all of the material that doesn't look like what I'm after, right? It's not like you're creating something. It's like you're removing all the material in order to expose something that's already in there. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So that's, dude, and maybe that's just way too, maybe that's just too crunchy or too, granola for folks. I don't know, because I'm not that kind of a person. I'm not a real, I'm not the kind of person that considers horses to be deeply spiritual and that sort of thing. But I feel like you got to have lofty goals in order to bring that horse to what's going to be the most enjoyable ride. And if you've never ridden a horse that's 100% natural, I would challenge folks to seek that, because that's a feeling like no other. When that horse is reading your mind, and which is what we want, right? At the end of the day, we want those horses to read our minds, because that's the ultimate, right? Then you are one with your horse. When you get that, that's the pinnacle. That's what I'm looking for. I want that horse to read my mind.
So that does bring up a lot of thoughts. One I was going to ask you, like you kind of got into, and I'm going to use a little different word here, but the horse world, or at least large chunks of it, have gotten very woo-woo lately. And I'm not down with the woo-woo, and it doesn't sound like you're down with the woo-woo either. How do you handle that, I guess? Do you have many people that come to you and they are looking for this soul connection with an animal that has a brain the size of a fist? Or I've come across people that almost seem to think that horses are omnipotent and they're here to teach us, and we need to, sort of need to learn from them as though they are some sort of higher being or something. I kind of tend to lump all of that into what I call the unicorn syndrome of people that they're dealing with a mythical romantic version of what a horse is in their mind, but they are not at all in awareness or reality with the actual animal standing before them. Do you have a lot of that in your world, or do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't think so much. I think that except for trolls on social media, I tend to deflect a lot of those people. Now, a lot of people would think that what I just told you would be woo-woo. In fact, I kind of think that way sometimes about myself. Sometimes I think, God, Boatwright, what are you thinking, man? Just get on that son of a gun and go pin those cattle and forget about all that mess. But I don't know. I can't help it. I guess I'm a philosopher at heart, and so I want to go down those rabbit holes. If only in my mind, I do that. But I try not to judge folks for what they believe concerning that connection with the horse. But I will say that yes, a lot of folks are looking for that connection. All right. So let's start there, and we'll take the deeper part of what you were saying in a second. But I have found personally, since I was raised around horses, I never had the idea that I was going to touch this horse or be in this horse's presence, in his close proximation, and make a connection with him. I've never felt like that was a a possibility for me because I was raised around horses, and my dad was a pretty pragmatic, pretty rough hewn type of fella. My dad was, if I ever said something like that, he'd have laughed at me first of all, and then made fun of me. From then on out about, he'd be asking me, are you connecting with him yet? While the son gun's trying to buck me off. But I don't think that, I know also that people are looking for that, and I would love for them to get that. But the reality is you only make a connection with a horse. You truly only make a connection with, regardless of what you feel inside. You only make that connection with that horse when that horse can count on you. If the horse can't count on you, if you're disingenuous and he can't rely on you to communicate with him the proper things at the proper time and take care of him, you're not making a connection with him. I don't care how you feel. That horse is not going to be connected with you. Now, he might be gentle. He might love for you to scratch on him. But when it comes down to that spiritual thing that folks are looking for, they want it immediately. They want to think, well, it's love at first sight, with this horse, but the horse isn't feeling it. The horse is, they're on, first of all, it's a horse, it's not a person. And they only get that connection when they have 100% confidence in a person, that person is going to guide them in the right path. And then the other side of it where folks, the extreme of that is like what you were saying, where people are, and man, I hate to be, like I said, I'm not trying to be judgmental or critical of people. I just want them to be realistic, to be safe. If all you ever want to do is pet and love on a horse, well, then fine, just pet and love on him and have that connection, smell them and hug them and whatever. I mean, I get that. I get good feelings from that myself, I feel like if you didn't get those things, then maybe you're in the wrong business. But as far as like, I just want them to be realistic and put in the time. And that's what it all boils down to, is how much time are you spending with your horse? You're only going to make that connection if you're there being the leader that you're supposed to be for that horse, and you can't do that in an hour a week or in 20 minutes a week, or living in your own bubble and not learning. You've got to get out. That's what I'm always telling people. If you're not learning, there is no static existence. You're either going forward or you're going backwards, right? There's no neutral in this deal. The horse is the same way. He's either learning the right things or he's learning the wrong things. There's no static position for a horse. So that's what I want people to understand. You need to do the work. And what it all boils down to, and this is probably why I am so enamored of the Stoics and the ancient Greeks, is that horsemanship is not horsemanship per se. Horsemanship is self-improvement. If you're not working on yourself, making your field timing, your balance, your understanding, deepening your level of empathy, if you're not consciously working on those things all the time, you're not getting better. And Daniel, I know that you've been around long enough that you can attest to that. It's not about, if you're not consciously, and I won't repeat that, but I feel like that's what is missing. And I really try to bring that fact. We put it in to one of our latest ads that we're running, that self-improvement's built into the fabric of B1, because I truly believe that. I really, really do. I've been in this business for a long time, and I've been around a lot of guys. I love them as brothers, some of these guys, but they've been doing what they do for a long time, whether they're cowboys or horse trainers or whatever, and they haven't gotten a whole heck of a lot better. And it's almost like some of them, and I'm not passing judgment on them, because they're just trying to make a living like the rest of us, feed their families and get along in life best they can. But it almost seems like some of them hate what they do. I've seen guys get around cows and they get that stick or that hot shot out, and man, next thing you know, their blood pressure's through the roof. The cattle are boiling in circles. They're not going anywhere. They're wringing their tails. This guy's pissed to high heaven. He's ready to,
Yep.
He'd shoot cattle if he thought it would help. And it's obvious that he hates his job. He does not like that part of it. I mean, and so, God, I never wanted to be that guy. I love what I do and I want to get better and I want to help people get better. But I don't feel like I would be doing that if I were promoting the idea of all you have to do is get in this horse's presence and you're going to make this spiritual connection with him, because I don't believe it. Sorry, I just don't. And then the idea that a person would look to a horse to lead them, like they would put the responsibility of being the leader on the horse. Well, that's just a cop out. That's just sheer laziness, really, is what it is. Maybe they've lost faith in trying to find human leaders because they have to interact with those people and it's uncomfortable. And so they've abandoned that idea. And now they're going to put all of that responsibility onto this animal that can't argue with them or can't lead them or can't tell them things that are uncomfortable, because at the end of the day, that's what it is. They don't want to hear anything that convicts them. They don't want to hear the truth. And so let's put it all on an animal, that can't even tell me that sort of thing. So, dude, that's my ignorant redneck opinion on all that stuff. I know it's going to piss people off. I piss people off all the time on the internet. I don't mean to. I really don't, because I really do love people and I want things to be the best, but I don't feel like lying to folks is going to help them. Thoughts?
No, I agree with you completely. I think you can build a connection with a horse. I do agree with you completely that is something that has to be built. And I think that the only way to build it is to be in the world of reality and aware of the horse and empathetic toward what is actually happening right now. If you're on some parallel script in your mind that isn't dealing with the reality of what's happening right now, I don't think you have a prayer in actually building a connection with a horse, because the horse lives in the world of reality. And if you are not there with him, he's not going to trust you, because that's just how they're built. So I think we again, I don't want to be too judgmental, but I think we have a serious problem with avoiding reality in the horse world right now, and too much of this sort of parallel course toward good feelings and things, and we're just approaching it the wrong way. I guess sort of bringing all of this together, I mentioned the controversial video that you did not long ago. That was on you not really caring whether a horse followed you around the round pen or not. You want to talk about that a little bit right now?
Yeah, I mean, since we're pissing people off, we might as well go, all the way. So, so just to give some reference, all of my social media content is taken strictly from our instructional videos. What we do is we remove 59-second or less sections out of those videos and we upload them as reels or shorts, depending on the platform, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. And there was one where I was working a horse, and I happened to start talking about what is called join up, and I actually think that word is trademarked by a fellow in this industry. And I don't want to step on his toes. I don't mean anything by that, but I'm going to use this in a general fashion, right? Join up, a horse joining up with me is where the horse would follow, what I call follow me around like a dog. And I don't want my horses to do that. And a lot of people got really upset because I said, I'm not the kind of guy that wants his horses to follow him around like a dog. I would much rather that horse stay where I put him. And man, yeah, people got really upset over that. They took it personally, and they got offended. A lot of folks really got offended. And I ended up taking the thing down off of Facebook because it's just a distraction for me. I don't need all of that negative distraction in my life. I left it up on the other platforms. So if you guys are interested, you can see it on YouTube or Instagram or TikTok. So, if we're talking about, I mean, we could go down the rabbit hole of people trolling on social media and strictly doing it in order to point out the flaws that they see that other people are doing. At the end of the day, not a single person that commented negatively on those posts have ever shown the world what they're doing, on there. They're just there to add a negative influence to the world, which is freaking wrong. I mean, if your single goal in life is to make the world worse by spewing your opinions out there on social media just because it's easy, I don't have a whole lot of use for you. There are a lot of people, I obviously want to, I want to serve our community, the people that actually think that they could learn from what we have to offer. I definitely want to serve those folks. And I just want to leave those other folks on the periphery and not be influenced by them. But the idea that a horse would follow me around like a dog, I find to be unnecessary. And I actually find it to be an impediment to getting what I want out of the horses. I know where I'm going with all of my horses. Like, I know what that end goal is. And I think that that's a problem with most of the things that we encounter, especially when we're younger. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what it looks like. And so the path to get there is not straight. But I know exactly where I'm going with these horses. I know what I want them to look like, feel like. I know what I want them to feel like. In other words, I want to create a feeling inside that horse, and I know what that is. And I think I've got a pretty good idea of how to create that in that horse. It varies from horse to horse, but I have a pretty good idea of how to treat that horse in order to make him feel good inside. And sometimes I make mistakes. I mean, I definitely do. And we always include all of those mistakes in our videos. I want to make sure that people understand how they would get themselves out of a jam if they do something wrong. I do things wrong all the time. Mm-hmm. But the idea that a horse would follow me around, like I was saying, I know what I want that horse to look like in the end. And a crucial piece of that puzzle is a solid ground tie. I don't rely on horses ground tying when I'm out in the middle of a 2-section pasture. I'll hobble that horse, but I need that horse to ground tie for a lot of other different instances, and having the horse that, if he's questioning in his mind, should I follow or should I stay? 100% of the time, I'd rather him choose to stay. That's all I was trying to say. Stay where I put you, because I don't need you to follow me around and come into my space, because I can very easily, when I'm ready for you, I'll come into your space, I'll put the halter on you, and then I'll lead you, right? And it's not an issue of leading. All the horses are halter broke. That's what halter broke means. They lead off of that pressure and they stay right where I put them. But if that horse is not on a halter, I want him to stay put. And like I said, that's only that's the straightest path to get to where I want to get to. And if I have that horse following me around like a dog, then that is a distraction for that horse, and it's not staying on that straight and narrow path. No judgment against people that want, I don't, why would I care if folks want their horse to follow them around? I think that's great if that's what you're looking for out of your horse, but it's not what I'm looking for. And I want to lead my clients in the straightest possible path to get to where they want to go. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I would say it's not unlike the standing up in the saddle as a party trick kind of a thing. In reality, that does not mean nearly as much as what people think it does. Kind of like do I need to? I look at it the same deal. If a colt wants to come to me, then I'll kind of play on that and get them to come to me, and then we'll work on ground tying separate. If they don't, maybe I'll spend a couple minutes on it. Is it worth me spending another 20 minutes over 3 days just to have that one thing in there? It's not, because I'm changing that next week anyway. So I'm very much on board with what you're saying. And we do have.
Yeah, that's the point. Like having to come back and change that. Sorry.
Yeah. No, and we do have, if you were going to say, are there more horses out there that are reluctant to come to you or more horses that are pushy and in your bubble all the time? There's way more horses that are pushy and in your bubble. So if we had to adjust the whole industry one way or the other, it definitely needs to be to you stay over there where I put you, not feel free to just come right up in here and step on my toes, right? So
Well, if you think about it from a safety perspective, 100% of horse related industry 100% of horse related injuries are caused by the horse being in the person's space. There's never been an injury caused by a horse that's not in a person's space, right?
mm-hmm. Yep. 30 feet away, he can't hurt
it's
you,
not
can
possible. It's impossible. And so why? And I don't, man, again, I swear I don't mean to be offensive. It's just what I've learned over time, and especially with people that don't have a lot of experience with horses. They think that it's great to have that horse coming to them and putting the horse having his head on the person's shoulder or whatever, coming and rubbing on him or whatever. But man, there are more people hurt in that circumstance than God. The injuries are probably untold because most folks would never say it or they don't make it to the hospital or whatever. But I personally, if you do the research, there's over 100,000 hospital-related injuries because of horses every year in the United States. 100% of those injuries are caused by the person being in close proximity with the horse. So why not just keep that horse away from you? He can stand right there, still give you 100% of his attention and be there for you when you need him. And they all will, you know. And I won't crucify one for following me around. I would never do that. But all things being equal, what I'm looking for is that horse to stay over there. And I'll get him to do that, even if he wants to follow me around.
So this brings up a couple of things for me that I'd be interested in your take on. You discussed earlier when we started this philosophical bend about how a horse would naturally turn to go over there to the left to the water trough or something like that. And I completely agree with everything that you're saying there. There's a particular way he's going to use his body. I would also bring into that we've got people that do groundwork with horses that almost gets, I call them rituals at some point in time. I think we do too much teaching of a few groundwork exercises, and we do, well, I would say that we have as an industry, people don't have any idea why they're doing groundwork. They don't know when they need to, when they can stop doing it, what the real point and purpose of it is. They just get into these rituals and they go through 20 minutes of steps 1 through 7 every day when they're out there working their horse. And one of the really harmful parts of that, I think, is the disengaging of the hindquarter exercises. There's a point and a purpose to that, but it is definitely one of those things that you can overdo. And I see that done all the time. And there's a ton of people that'll start incorporating that W word with that. And almost every clinic and every lesson I do, we have to stop and have a talk. Like, look, whoa does not mean stop, take your butt out of the dirt and turn 90 degrees. That is not what whoa means. Whoa means if you're pointing north, you need to engage your butt and you need to still be pointing north when we get done with this thing. And just like you, if I'm going to have a horse on a circle around me and I stop him, he needs to be pointing on that circle and not turn into me until I ask. And then when I do ask, I don't want him to take his butt out of the dirt and step over there. I want him to step to me with his front end and his nose, just like he would if he were turning to that water trough. And that is like an epidemic in this industry right now of people going through those rituals. And once you get that horse, to me, a really, really big, important sort of a keystone thing with a horse is teaching, and it doesn't matter if they're English, Western, or whatever, but they have to learn how to engage and hold ground with the outside hind leg. If they can't do that, they're not going to turn well. They're not going to do lead departures well. That is just one of those absolute keystone skills. And I don't think we verbalize that like we should. But if you go to disengaging the hindquarters 8 million times, you're habituating exactly the opposite of a very, very foundational, important way that we need that horse to move. So I got on a little soapbox right there, but I'll give the floor to you. What are your feelings about all that?
Man, let's just go ahead and assume that you and I are going to be on a soapbox for the rest of this conversation, because I feel like we could unpack this stuff for days. I mean, I'm wearing my soapbox out, but that's okay. I guess that's what I do for a living. So I have gotten to where I adamantly, vehemently am opposed to disengaging a horse's hindquarters. I think that if you want to lose control of your horse, the best, aside from doing nothing or making them dull to your hands, disengage your horse's hindquarters over and over and over again. Because in order to have control over a horse, their hindquarters have to be engaged all the time. That's why every performance discipline that exists around getting the horse to engage his hindquarters, right? All of them. And I'm going to cover a couple different things here. But if you teach your horse, and you have to teach a horse to disengage their hindquarters, because they don't do it naturally. A horse doesn't naturally lock his front end down and whip his rear end around it. The only circumstance that I can think of that a horse would do that is when they're setting up to kick another horse double barrel, right? I can't think of, and maybe someone can correct me on this, but I can't think of a single instance, if a rider wasn't on that horse's back, that he would disengage his hindquarters, because the horse knows that he has to keep his hindquarters engaged, or unconsciously knows that he has to balance his weight on his hindquarters, and I know that sort of thing was brought into the industry as a safety. Well, I shouldn't assume why it was brought in. I shouldn't do that. But I do think that a lot of people rely on it because it's easy. I think that clinicians can say they can teach someone to disengage their hindquarters in about 30 seconds. And the people get a good feeling from that. They say, oh, look, I'm disengaging the horse's hindquarters. And that's great. All that's awesome. But at the end of the day, like I was saying, I'm on a straight line path to getting somewhere with my horse. And that somewhere is the word broke. I want my horse to be broke, which means I've got control of that horse at all times. And it's just like the joining up thing. I don't want to do anything that takes me away from that straight line path, and disengaging the hindquarters does, right? It's a waste. I feel like it's a waste of my time, and my verbiage, man, I really don't mean to be offensive to people, but I feel like I want to be realistic. If I'm trying to get control of that horse's mind, disengaging his hindquarters, which is ultimately what I want, we want to get that horse to where we have control of all of his body parts, primarily his mind, because if our thought becomes his thought, then we don't have any issues there. Disengaging the hindquarters is a divergent path, and it's not all that safe. It's really not. If a horse is running away with you, the last thing you're going to want to do is kick his hip out 90 degrees, because the son of a gun is going to endo on you. I've had it happen. And when their front feet lock down, all that weight's still moving forward. And next thing you know, you're going to be underneath that horse. So, man, that's just, yeah. I hate that folks have been misinformed in that area, And I see a lot of my clients show up for clinics and lessons, and they can't get their horse to turn around to save their life. And the reason is because that horse is so bound up in the front end, his rear end is loose and just whipping around his front end. And it's almost impossible, and the sad thing is just like what I was talking about with the dull horses earlier. you have to shock that horse out of that. You have to almost be inhumane. It's a sad thing to say, but you almost have to be inhumane to that horse to change that behavior, because the horse it's so ingrained. He's so convinced that that's what he should be doing. The only way to get him to stop doing that is to shock him out of it, with a bit, pressure, or spurs or whatever. And I'm not into that. I'm not interested in doing that. And so I just don't do it. I just don't disengage hindquarters, you know.
I would say
Thoughts? Give me your thoughts on that, Daniel. Tell me where.
no, I agree. I think part of that too is a horse is a flight animal. And anytime
Yeah.
you bind him up and remove flight, you're going to make him more insecure. And generally, when people are trying to use that, is the point where the horse needs the most confidence anyway. So if you're habitually taking flight away from him, are you making him more confident, more relaxed, and more trusting of you? Or are you making him more insecure, less likely to trust you? You know, are you mentally heading in the right direction or the wrong direction? And secondarily, I would say when you were talking about safety and people getting hurt by the proximity of the horse and all that, I would venture to say 90% of those injuries that people have, probably more like 99%, deal with the front end of the horse. When I get that pushy, spoiled horse that comes in, my first goal is to get the shoulder broken, get that shoulder moving away from me. I don't worry about the hind end at all at that point. And when I can move that horse's shoulder away and get them out of my space away from me, that's when I feel like I've got the lion's share of that safety spoiled problem resolved. So I think we kind of, it's definitely true that advanced horsemanship deals with control of the hindquarter, but we don't necessarily get to start with our goal. Sometimes I think we don't focus enough on the shoulder in some of those instances, and this disengaging of the hindquarter thing is, you know, I'm not going to say there's never a point and a purpose to it, but we have way overdone the good parts of it, you know, way. So,
Well, you know as well as I do that you can get control of a horse's hindquarters without ever disengaging it. You know, the horse has 100% control of his hindquarters and he never disengages it. Right. So it just stands to reason that we can do that too. And, you know, I prove it every day on my videos. My primary focus is just to keep that front end moving, because a horse is going to carry 60% of his weight on his front end. And so he's going to carry 60% of our weight on his front end too, which is going to lead him naturally, you know, to want to stop moving his front end. So I spend a lot of my time just keeping those front feet moving. I always say that's my deal breaker. The only deal breaker in the whole deal is when you stop moving your front end. When you stop moving your front end, I'm going to jump you out of that or squirt you out of that and get that front end moving again. And then we can start back with the lesson.
One other thing I wanted to get into with you a little bit was stopping a horse. You talked about that a little bit ago, and I come from a cutting horse background as well. I used to just be a futurity 2-year-old man is pretty well what I cut my teeth doing. One of the things that I have a little bit of conflict with the world in is stopping horses. Again, if we look at a horse stop naturally out there in the pasture, they use all 4 legs to stop. And we've got this need or desire for horses to mark 11s out there. And like I learned pretty quick when I was working cattle that what I really want a horse to do is to stop forward motion in as few feet as possible. And if they lock up their hind feet, it's just like a car that doesn't have anti-lock brakes. They're going to slide right on past the cow over and over. And if you get to doing, like we both have a doctor in yearlings background, you get a little too much of that going on some green grass, and you're going to have some harrowing moments out there by yourself in a pasture at one point in time. So I've always been way more concerned with sort of the 4-wheel drive stop than the locking up the hocks and sliding right on past whatever I was trying to stop for. So do you have some thoughts on that? Are you with me on this? I mean, we kind of have the standards of what a horse needs to exhibit when they show, but I want both options. If I'm going to ask for big old stick your butt in the dirt. I can get that. That's not what I'm going to ask for 95% of the time.
Yeah, as I said, I'm not a showman. I'm not into showing horses. I have shown some, and I think that maybe after my kids are grown, I'd like to really, sure enough, show some cow horses. I would love to be able to show at a high level cow horses or cutting horses at a high level. And in that, when I get to that point, I'll probably want those cow horses to do those big sliding stops. But I call my business B1 Ranch Horsemanship for a reason, because I want all of the maneuvers to be done in the most efficient manner possible for the ranch horse. Just like you're saying, a horse that really buries his rear end and pushes, a reining or a cow horse, a big stopping horse that really leaves those 11s like you're talking about, they push with their rear end. They're pushing deep on their heels on those hind feet. And that's not conducive to a nice, safe using horse. Like you're saying, if you're trying to cut a yearling in grass, you're going to want your horse to crawl to a stop, right? All 4 feet are contacting the ground, and that horse is not locking his rear end down, because he's going to scare himself. He's going to slip. And he's gonna either overreach with a hind foot, clip a front foot, or he's gonna slide. I've had horses slide and land on their butts before. I took a horse out one time, and the guy that taught me was very old school, very handy horseman. Don't get me wrong, he was really old school, and he loved to cut cattle on the grass, but he always did it barefoot. We kept all those horses barefoot back in those days. And I had a horse one time. He was a decent cutting horse, he was developing into a horse that could cut cattle. Let me say that. I don't know if he would have ever been a show horse. I felt like he had a lot of talent, but I felt like he was getting sort of stale or tired of working cattle in an arena. So I was like, well, heck, I'll just go back to the old school days, and I'll go and I'll work my cattle out of the corner of the pasture in the grass. And this son of a gun went over there and drove his rear end in the ground to come back with that calf, and he lost his footing. He slipped, and he didn't fall all the way down, but that horse never stopped good after that. Mm-hmm. And, because he was scared. It was because he was scared. And I am ashamed to say, but I'm not going to protect people from the fact that I've screwed horses up over the years. And that was one thing that I did to that horse. I expected that stop to be too big, too deep. I didn't teach him to. I wasn't developing that crawl to a stop that I'm talking about, which is really. I still want my horses to put 2 hocks in the ground and stop when we're working a cow on good footing in the arena. I want to put their hind feet in the ground at the same time. But those big dragging stops don't have a lot of value to me in the real world. I know the show world really wants to see that, but I find it to be more of a hindrance than anything.
I've seen it a problem in the show world too. Like I've known some cutting horses that could stop really hard, but they couldn't get back up to turn with the cow after they stop. They just go bury themselves in the ground, but they lose the cow right after. Reining, they've got these big slides, but then they can sit there and pause for 10 seconds to set up the next thing. They don't have to immediately go do. And those horses, a lot of times I think it's partly because they're putting sliders back there, but they don't hold the ground. They don't go there and squat and hold and are prepared for the next maneuver. They stand back up. And so, yeah, just some of the practical stuff kind of does get lost. We get so specialized these days that sort of the all around horse that can do everything and do it really practically and be handy about it kind of gets lost in the mix of it all. And I think that's really a shame. I know those are the ones that generally kind of half my heart. Those horses that you remember, that old war horse gelding that you could do anything on. He probably wouldn't have brought $5,000 at the sale, but like if you had to go to war, he was the one you weren't going to get the show horse. You were going to go crawl on that old gelding. So anyway.
I want my horses to be. So when I started working at Creek Plantation back in the early 2000s, they had a pen full of geldings there that, I haven't really seen a pen of geldings like that since then. There will be a dozen geldings standing there at any time that you could go get on. You could cut a cow. Excuse me. You could back them in the box and rope cattle. You could rope cattle outside. The kids could come and trail ride them. They were just a pleasure to be around. And those horses were always the most sought after horses. When people came to Creek to buy horses, if they weren't there to buy a baby, they wanted one of those geldings, and those things sold for a premium. And there's a reason, because aside from the show horse world, well, the backbone of the horse business is people just pleasure riding. That's I would venture to say, I don't know this for certain, but I would venture to say that the biggest segment of the population of horse owning people are people that just like to get on their horse and go for a ride.
Yeah.
And for me personally, I love that horse that will run over there and stop a cow and come back with it in a real natural fashion. I can cut on him. I can pin cattle, and he's smart about it. I can run a cow down, and he's going to rake that cow, and I can leave my reins draped, and I can focus on my roping. And he's going to keep me in a good position all the time. May not always be perfect, but he's going to try real hard to do his job. And then he's going to stay in the bridle. So those three things: cutting cattle, tracking and rating cattle, and staying in the bridle. And then, of course, being nice and quiet and cover country and cover obstacles and that sort of thing. That's what I want my horses to do. And so I feel like, I'm only going to serve that segment of the horse population in my business. The people that would like to have that. That's okay with me. That's because, man, that's what I love. Shoot, if I can just throw my leg over the son of a gun and he'll hit that long trot and start swinging them split reins side to side, and we're just going out there and we spot a cow and he starts crawling to a stop and his whole head drops down. And then if I've got to pick up and shake out a loop and run him down and neck that booger and then lay him down, and I can walk that horse right up over top of that calf and get him doctored and he ground ties. And I'm getting goosebumps right now thinking about it, because, man, there is nothing better than riding that horse, in my opinion. Better than showing, better than any. That's what it's all about to me. And so that's what I'm shooting for, man. That's my straight path that I'm headed towards. That's why I try to eliminate all those other distractions, like joining up and all that stuff. So I don't know. Maybe I won't be a good clinician. Maybe I won't, make millions in this business with that attitude, but I can't help it. That's just who I am.
I think there's a definite need for that sort of horse, and that kind of horse is the sort that you can go just about any other direction with. There's nothing that says that horse that you doctor in the yearling with can't be a hunter or an eventer or an endurance horse or rodeo events, or certainly trail riding and all of that kind of stuff. I think that's the mark of being well-rounded and being able to handle all of that stuff. And I'm right there with you. Would you say there's any specific thing, skill, cue, something with starting colts that you just feel like you really have a knack for? Like, you never have any trouble with this. You start it and 5 minutes later, you got them doing it. Like, is there a Richard Boatwright special sort of a thing out there that you just have that knack for this particular thing, or your favorite thing maybe to teach one to do or something?
That's a good question.
Like, I'll give you an example. I'm known for bits. That's this little niche that I've accidentally found. My actual knack, I can put more leg on a horse in a short period of time than just about anybody that I have ever seen. And I actually think my ability to control them with my legs is what opens the door for the stuff I do with the bridle, because I'm not overly dependent, like you were talking about the English rider where they're hanging on them all the time. I don't have to be overly dependent on that bridle, so I can be way more subtle and easy with it because of what I can do with my legs and my seat. So that's sort of the direction I'm, or an example anyway.
Well, you and I come from a background of cutting, and so I too am very strong with my legs. And I have strong legs. Probably the strongest part about my physiology is my legs. And so that, coupled with the cutting background, I use my legs a lot too. I find that I can use my legs to transition a horse. It's kind of like people use, like the vaquero world uses the hackamore to transition from the snaffle bit to the bridle. I can use my legs to transition from the snaffle bit to a shank bridle to a hackamore, whatever. It doesn't matter, because they're primarily listening to my legs anyway, right? And so my seat and my legs are my primary cues. My hands are secondary. Now, I know there's a lot of people in the industry that would say that that's backwards. I can't help that. It's just the way that I do it. And I try to get my horses, I can get my horses bridled up. I get them very, very soft in the face and all that stuff. But my legs are very important to that part. I've got a client, he's a great guy. He's not really a client, more of a friend, that he has very weak legs. He has an issue with his legs, and they're real weak. And so he really can't rely on his legs at all, riding his horses. And his horses ride really good. They're really broken, really nice. And so I can't criticize anyone for not using their legs, but that's the way I ride. But the one thing that what you're saying is I'm going to break that, what you're asking, I'm going to break that all the way down to the fundamental thing that I'm looking for. And I always do that. I want to get down, okay, what's the most basic thing that I'm looking for that's going to give me the most control or take me to my goal the fastest? And then what's the easiest thing for the horse to understand? And I would say that getting the horse's attention is my number one thing that I focus on. I'm very good at getting a horse's attention on me, either from the ground or from the saddle. Okay. And man, I'm going to head down another rabbit hole on you here. What I consider to be a broke horse is a horse that gives me his attention 100% of the time. If I can't pull on those bridle reins, if you think about it, every problem that you're going to have from the saddle is going to be because you lose the horse's attention. Almost always. The horse has got his ears up, his head up. He's focusing on something other than the rider, right? And so I feel like that's job number one. If I can't get that horse's attention, I can't teach him a damn thing. And so I call that the code. It sounds like a marketing scheme, but it's really not. I tell when I'm making videos, I'm talking to myself. I'm trying to remind myself what to do. Don't screw this up, Boatwright. Respect the code. That's what I say. Respect the code. When that horse looks at me with two eyes and he gives me 100% of his attention, I release that pressure, right? Because when I do that, then I know, okay, I've got his attention. Whatever I'm trying to teach him, I can now allow him to soak on that, process it. And then when I see him start to lick and chew, I'm certain that lesson is processed, whatever that is, and then we can move on, right? And so I expect him to respect the code, and I hold myself to the same standard. When I say code, I mean, when I flex a horse laterally, I'm not so much looking for that horse to bend around. And I saw this in your bidding video, man, and I was so glad that you put that in there, because I think this is really a misunderstood concept. Lateral flexion is not about that horse bending his neck around like a noodle and touching your boot, the tip of your boot, with his nose. In my mind, it's about getting control of that horse's mind. When I flex my horse to the left, I want him to look to the left. And okay, we're going back to that natural turnaround, right? there's only three reasons that a horse won't do what you're asking him to do. One, he doesn't understand, which is typically the case. Two, he's distracted. Or three, he's not physically capable, right? The physically capable thing is not an issue in quarter horses typically, unless you're just trying to push this horse way past his capabilities. If we're just talking about turning around, every horse can turn around. If he's got four legs, a booger can turn around, right? So when you're talking about turning a horse around, and your goal is to get that horse to turn around in a natural fashion, well, you've got to put that thought there, right? First. If you get the feet moving first, it's mechanical, because we've already established that that's not the way a horse turns around. The way a horse turns around is he cocks his ear, he looks that direction, he bends his nose, flexes his neck, steps with that inside foot. So if we're trying to get that, then let's scaffold it from the very most basic thing. Let's get his attention going to the left, right? And how do we know if his attention is going to the left? Well, we know that because he's looking that direction. You can always tell what a horse is thinking about by what he's looking at. If there's a coyote coming across the pasture and the mare's got a foal on her side, what's she going to do? She's going to stick her head up in the air. Two ears are going to go forward. She's going to look at that coyote. She's going to blow snot at him, right? She's going to snort. Well, that's the same thing when you're turning that horse around. If you're turning your horse to the left and all you can see is a big white ring on the left side of his eye, it's because he's looking to the right. And the reason he's looking to the right is because he's thinking about going to the right. And if you got your horse doing that and you squeeze him with two legs, what's he going to do, Daniel?
Yeah, go forward and try to go to the right. Yep.
That's right. And so that proves to you right there that you don't have control of the horse's mind. So that's the one thing that I feel like I'm good with that. But let me add this caveat. I'm not good enough. I want to get that to where I can get that horse, where I can get control of his mind the second I get on his back. I don't know if I'll ever get there. I don't know. But I hate to see people flexing their horse. Their nose comes to the toe of their boot, but they're pulling their ears are facing the other direction. You look at their eye, they're looking the other way. And most of the time, so that leads me into a horse's bad side. So, I hear that a lot. A horse has a bad side. Well, I'm not 100% convinced that that's the case, right? I feel like that a horse has a vulnerable side, right? So if you think about the feeling of your leg or a stirrup on a horse's side is so foreign to them, that's something that they have. It's not natural for a horse to experience that sensation, something bouncing against their side or touching them there. And the most vulnerable place on a horse is between their heart girth and their flank. They don't have any defense for that area right there, right? Unless they can spin and kick or spin the other way and bite or paw, they can't protect that area. And so when you're sitting up there, they're very vulnerable. They feel vulnerable, just like we are very vulnerable in our rib cage. That's why we're ticklish right there, because it's an unprotected area, And so think about this. So if his bad side is to the left and he doesn't want to bend or travel to the left, and you flex him to the left, he's looking to the right, and that right ear is cocked and he's moving his hip around. It's because he feels vulnerable on his right side because he can't see what's going on there. And that feeling, that touch over there has got him distracted, right? And so he doesn't want to bend to the left because if he feels like if he bends to the left, he's leaving that right side exposed and he can't protect it. And that's just my woo-woo theories, man. But I find it to be very accurate. If you really watch their behavior, that the idea that he's just naturally stiff to one side or the other, that leaves there's too many holes in that idea for me. I want to get down to why is this horse stiff this way? And the idea of being left-handed or right-handed is valid. I think that's valid. But I think more than that, it's because that horse feels vulnerable. He doesn't trust you touching him on that side. And so he wants to be able to see it. And that's why he'll move his hip. Those horses that are stiff to the left, they'll be moving that hip around because they're trying to see what your leg is doing, right? And if you ambush him with a spur, when you've got him bent to the left and you ambush him over here, you're going to wreck him forever. He'll probably never trust that leg again, So there you go. Shoot holes in that, please.
No, it brings up a thought for me. Like you, I have pretty strong legs, so I've never needed sharp spurs or anything like that. If I need to kick one, I can do plenty with just my leg. So I always ride with like a 6-point blunt, a pretty darn blunt sort of a rowel. I use a lot of leg contact. I touch them with my spurs a lot, and I don't want anything pokey or, I want them to get real comfortable with being touched with that blunt spur. And I've actually I've got a pair of 10 points on a nice custom made set of spurs that was given to me, and it probably took me 3 years to get where I could ride a horse with those things, because I had to really be conscious about what I was doing with my legs, not to scrape them up with those sharp spurs, because I was so used to the dull ones. So I'm just curious, you and I seem to be pretty similar in that. Do you have that same situation or anything, or?
Yeah, I've got a few sets of spurs. I've tried lots of stuff over the years, but my favorite go-to spurs, these little custom deals I had made 20 some odd years ago, and they're almost like a bronc riding spur. Almost. They don't turn down quite as much as a bronc spur, but they don't go up, they go down. Mm-hmm. And they have got a great big old like 1.5-inch rowel with little bitty, it doesn't have points on it at all. It doesn't have any edges. It's almost like a big coin, but it does have notches, right? I find that if I use a spur, and I have another set of Baldings that are sort of like a cutting spur, kind of. They've got a more gentle, they don't come way up. I've got shorter legs, and I'm very strong with my legs. So I want to be able to eliminate the distraction of my spurs on that, even though I use them a lot. Like you said, I use my spurs more than anything else. Like if I have a piece of equipment that's like my go-to, it's my spurs, because that's where I get the most control, that I can get the clearest signal that way. But yeah, I want to be able to eliminate my spurs as being a distraction. So I start off with a very gentle one that's not going to hurt them. And then I habituate. I'm not going to use the word desensitize, because I don't want them desensitized to it, but I want them habituated to my spurs, and to understand that when that spur touches them, it means lift their rib cage, flex their abdominal muscles, and lift that rib cage, whether it's this side or both sides. That's what that means. And were you taught when you were starting cutting horses, were you taught to not use your leg in the turn, or were you taught to go ahead and use that leg, your outside leg, in the turn when you're bringing that horse back with a cow?
No, I definitely use the outside leg, and then it becomes, after you've made the turn, it's your cowside leg that's keeping your horse bent as you're traveling across. So it was all legs all the time, pretty much. You could use the inside leg to initiate the turn, so your horse had plenty of bend and was nose to the cow, and then the cow should always help pull your horse through, and then that outside leg comes on to kind of zing them through there and becomes your inside leg once you've completed the turn and you're moving out the other way. So that's kind of how I was taught.
Have you ever tried to initiate the turn with that herd side leg?
I'm sure that I do. I'm generally, so I'll say I had a bit of a transition here when I starting cutting horses. I was not using the cow nearly enough to train my horse, so I probably was doing that a lot more then. I definitely ran into some issues where, when the client goes to get on the horse, the horse needs to work without the help at that point, and so I was over helping, and I needed to start letting go a little bit and let the cow start working my horse for me a little bit. That was probably one of the biggest challenges that I had in the cutting world, was letting go a little bit and learning how to use the cow to my advantage rather than it just being a prop out there. And I actually so I spent about 6 years apprenticing. The last 2 guys that I worked for, neither one of them was as good a horseman as I was. And what I mean by that is like strictly a horse trainer. They couldn't put a handle on a horse like I could, or any of that stuff. They were both more from the cowboy side of things, but they were way better at using the cow to train their horse for them. And that was an incredibly frustrating part of life for me, was learning that transition. So I may have gone down a rabbit hole on you there, but I would say I'm more inside leg to initiate a turn, or at least to have the bend there, and then the cow initiates the turn for me, and then I'm following up with the outside leg at this point.
Yeah, I'm glad I asked that, because that definitely aligns with what I'm talking about. The reason I asked if you ever initiate that turn, because I found over the years that when I try to initiate, in other words, the horse goes over there on the right end and he stops true and straight, right? And then as soon as he stops, the cow comes back, and without me helping with my hand or with my inside leg, I just put that right leg on. I either get a horse that goes forward or tracks that cow around instead of drawing through that turn and coming back. Mm-hmm. And this is where I came up with this theory about them being distracted. I figured out, well, when he's initiating that turn and that shoulder's going to the outside, he's already starting the turn. And then you add that outside leg. Well, now what you're doing is you're pushing his rib cage and his shoulder in behind his nose, which hustles him through that turn, right? Which makes the turn more efficient. But I found that if I put that leg on too early, I distract them and they can't turn as good, because again, they're lifting the rib cage here. If they're on the right end and I put that leg in, they're lifting their rib cage out towards the cow when it needs to be the opposite. Right. They have to lift that rib cage and create that pocket for the cow and then come through the turn. And then I hustle them with that outside leg. Mm-hmm. I've actually backed it up like on my 2-year-olds and stuff. I don't use that outside leg at all until it's completely exposed to the cow.
Yeah.
Until it truly becomes my cow leg. Then I hustle them, and I find that they turn that, and I've found, just for me, that turn becomes much more natural. It takes longer, but it becomes more natural if I leave my legs completely out of them till they're turned around and that cow's pulling them, and then I hustle them to the cow. What's your thoughts on that?
No, I would agree completely. That stage would probably be something I would be doing end of the 2-year-old year, start of the 3-year-old year, where I'm actually starting to step the horse in front of the cow to stop it. We're starting to control the cow rather than just follow it around and kind of learning the basics of rating and stopping with and all of that stuff. And I'm not saying I wouldn't, mid 2-year-old year, we're going to do one of those once in a while, but it's not going to be every turn. You're going to step them out there a little bit and then let them kind of get comfortable again. But that end of 2-year-old year, start of 3-year-old year, that would start to become more of the protocol to let the cow, like that's, if any of y'all are listening to this and you're not familiar with cow work, it's a cardinal sin for your horse to turn before the cow turns. The cow always has to initiate the turn, and it's like a razor blade to watch those really fast horses, the finished ones, doing it, because they'll beat the cow through the turn, but the cow always starts the turn before the horse does. But you can really start zinging that horse through the second half of that turn, where he'll jump out there and to the head to head and get the cow shut down again, and hopefully get them trapped in that little pocket in the center. I will, since we got into talking cutting horses here, I actually have never been a fan of the horses that stop straight and square. I always like them to be a little bit bent and to always stop with that off hind leg more underneath them, where they're and that's where I want them to hold that ground, so they're in the position to either go forward or to turn. But if they wind up both hind legs parallel, in the same spot, they marked 11s for us or whatever, they're going to have to take a step back with one of those legs or something in order to initiate a turn. So you actually have an extra step and thus extra time in that turn. So I've never liked for them to get too straight. I like horses that are a little bit more bent. I realize I'm not with the majority there. People definitely tend to like them straighter than I do, and that's fine. We all have our different preferences and our different styles, but but I don't like them too straight. I rather them a little bit bendier myself. So.
Well, I'm there with you on that. It's funny because I contradict myself all the time. I'd rather watch a horse that stops straight and puts both hocks in the ground at the same time, stays straight as an arrow. And, that's kind of an old school thing. I don't know if you've ever watched Boyd Rice's video. I think it's called Comes a Horseman. He talks. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He wants that horse to be arrow straight. And I love to watch those horses, but to ride them, I'd rather have my horse bent. I'll even hold their hip to the cow so that they're really exaggerating that pocket way later on, obviously. But I'll want them to bend in that stop and in the turn, for better or for worse. And again, I'm not a cutting horse trainer at all. I just want my ranch horses to work cattle efficiently. Well, and since I came up in the cutting program, that's what I use all of that as a basis to start all my horses.
What I would say about that is that Boyd's riding the best horses, the most athletic, well-bred horses in the world. It takes a much more athletic horse to be able to go straight and still keep up with the cow and make the turn and all. So it's a pretty small percentage of them that can do that and pull it off. If you ride the majority of your horses straight and you're not riding top 1% of 1% kind of horses, you're putting them at an athletic disadvantage, I think. Straight that's
a good point.
It's cool, but there's just not many of them that can actually pull it off and are athletic enough to still make it work. That would be you're helping the horse if you bend them a little bit, keep them in a more advantageous position to do the next thing. We are getting off in the weeds there. So anyway, I'm enjoying it, but we probably just lost half of the audience. Let's get back to B1 a little bit. What are kind of y'all's plans for the future? You've got the website with the videos on there. You had mentioned to me you're still heading to Colorado this summer, and I guess background in yearlings. Is this the last time you're going to be doing that? Is it kind of more focusing on clinics in the future, or what does the next 5 years look like for you?
Let me just say that I hope this isn't the last year. I hope that I get to do that for the rest of my life. That's all I want to do is cowboy. I mean, that's it. To me, that's the pinnacle. When I get to go up into that high country and spend time with my family, fishing and camping and cowboying and hanging out with those guys, because you just can't replace those people. They're the whole experience. That's what I want to do. So if I were to say my goal over the next 5 years would be to, grow B1, the goal for the business is to help people. That's got to be it. If that's not the goal, if that's not the mission statement to help people as much as we can make their horses better, then I might as well not be in business. The goal is not to make money per se. I'm tired of, I've lived in abject poverty most of my life because I wanted to be a cowboy. I knew that going into it, and that's just the way that a cowboy is. But that's the beauty of the internet, is that it gives guys like me and you the opportunity to pull our families out of poverty and still do what we were put on this earth to do, which is sit on the back of a horse and tend to cattle, So, what I would like to see is a dual role. One, I can support my family through the revenues generated by B1, both with clinics, primarily the video. The clinics are secondary, and the clinics are definitely secondary to me going to Colorado and cowboying. I would choose that over doing clinics any day, regardless of the revenue. I do like doing the clinics, don't get me wrong, and I do want to grow that. And I do also know that the clinic season is through the summer, which is when I'm going to be out there. So I'm going to have to compromise and do my clinics before and after, which I'm okay with. But at the end of the day, I want to give that experience to myself for the rest of my life. That's what I want to do. I want to be out there with cowboy people doing cowboy stuff. And I want to be able to take my family and give them that experience as well, because I think there's just a ton of value there. So hopefully over the next 5 years, that's what we'll be doing. We'll be growing B1 and living that life. We just came to a realization, like in the past few years, that we as Americans, and I don't know if it's exclusive to us, but we can design our life to look like whatever we want it to look like. We don't have to be trapped by, gosh, man, this is going to sound so spoiled, but we don't have to be trapped by jobs and these paradigms that we live in that keep us chained. We can live the life that we want to live. All you got to do is go out there and do it. Just freaking do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what my wife and we're very hard workers, very hard. And it's very hard. It's hard for us to change that paradigm of I've got to get up every day and I've got to bust my ass for somebody else in order to make $50 to put food on the table. Even though, yeah, that may be the case. I may have to make that $50, but I can make it however I want to make it. And so I choose to do it cowboying and teaching folks on the internet. And I hope that people, if anybody ever gets anything from me, and I know I spew a lot of stuff, a lot of babble and all, but I hope that people realize that and understand that you don't have to live your life as a slave to somebody else. You just don't have to. There are too many opportunities in this country. Now, I'm not going to say it's going to be easy. You're going to have to work your ass off. I mean, because nothing comes easy, nothing worthwhile, especially. And that's the crazy thing about nature in itself, is that anything that's worthwhile or good for us is hard ass labor. There's no escaping it. Ryan Holiday's book, The Obstacle is the Way, is a great look into that concept. Like all of the good things that you want in life. I don't know who said this. I'm quoting someone, paraphrasing, but all the good things that you want in life are hiding behind the shit you don't want to do.
Yep.
So go there. All that stuff you're afraid of doing, all that stuff that you don't want to do because you're going to sit on your ass or whatever, get up and go out there and do it, and you'll get the things that you want. But if you don't have if you don't have what it takes to do that, then you're going to stay where you are. But I can tell you that I'm not a smart guy. I don't have a whole heck of a lot going for me. I've got a strong back. My dad used to say he's got a strong back and a weak mind. That's me. So if I can do it, I guarantee you anybody can do it. You just got to make up your mind and go take the bull by the horns, and do it. So.
Well, I think for a guy who self-describes himself as not being real smart, you seem to have figured a whole lot of important stuff out. So here's to doing the best with what you got there.
That's it. Yeah. Making the most of what you got.
Or listening to your smart wife. One of the two.
That's it. Yeah. When I say you don't have to live as a slave to, I don't include wives there. You do have to,
A good partner in life is an invaluable resource, but no resource comes without a little pain, right? You gotta keep doing the work and embracing the hard parts, no question.
Yeah.
Well, Richard, we've been chatting for quite a while here. I think we had probably better wrap things up. We will have links to all of Richard's social media and his website and all of that stuff in the show notes. Is there anything you would like to leave the listeners with before we sign off?
Well, I don't know. I guess I probably covered all of my bases, but we're easy enough to find out there. I don't think people have too much of an effort, a problem finding B1. It's just the letter and the number one, B1. If you Google search it, it's going to bring up vitamin B1 primarily. And then eventually, especially if you just start typing H, eventually our stuff will come up. It's hard to put into words what you really want out of life and what you're trying to do for people. I hope that folks have got an idea of what we're here for. But I do want to end, Daniel, by complimenting you again, man, and thanking you for what you're doing. I've done a few podcasts, but we've never really gotten down deep into what you and I are talking about. And I think what you're doing, especially with your bidding video too, and I haven't watched the one that came out recently, but I will, and I'm going to buy that one. I want to support you. I want you to continue doing what you do, and know that, man, I got a lot of respect for you. Thanks for that
Well,
bidding video, especially. If you guys haven't seen it, you better get it and pay full retail. Do whatever you got to do. Support Daniel and what he's doing, because I'm telling you, I'm pretty proactive about catching all the content, whether it's books, videos, whatever. I want to learn as much as I possibly can. And I can't say, there's a couple of exceptions out there, but that video is very thorough. Maybe it's definitely the most thorough video on bidding that exists, period. And I should say piece of content, because books don't even go as deep as you do there and give as much valuable information as you do. By far, it's going to be the landmark. If it's not already, it's the landmark in teaching folks about bits and bidding when it comes to horses. But man, thank you. Can't say enough good things about what you're doing. Just truck on, brother.
Well, I appreciate that plug. That was not necessary, but that's it. It's been a fun little journey for us. I'm not sure what you meant by the new video. We've got a course that we've been working on, which, yeah. So that is, so the videos that you got, that's about 5.5 hours of content, and it's that length specifically because that was what I could fit on 4 DVD discs. That came out a few years ago. So there was a bunch I had to edit out in order to make it fit. And then there's a lot of things I've learned. I think I was doing the research and lining all that out about 7 or 8 years ago. So there's been a bunch of stuff I've kind of picked up since then. So the course is kind of I'm getting to fill in some of the holes that I know you thought that was thorough, but there was actually a lot of stuff I wanted to say that I couldn't fit in there. And so the course kind of gives me the opportunity to do that stuff. So that's my nerd side getting to come out. But I appreciate you saying that. That's very nice. And the same to you, the genuine nature of what's behind what you're saying and the fact that you know what the hell you're talking about was very apparent to me when I started seeing your videos on YouTube and social media. There's a few other guys out there that kind of strike me that way. Mark Lyon, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's sort of the same cloth, not nearly as prevalent on social media, but every once in a while you come across one of you guys like that. You're just going like, why the hell isn't everybody listening to this guy? Like, how does this other person have an audience and y'all all aren't just listening to this guy? Because this is what you should be listening to. He actually knows what he's talking about, and he's actually trying to help you and not fleece you. Tell you just enough so that you have to buy part 2 or whatever the next thing is, because part 1 would about half get you killed. So folks, check out Richard's stuff. He is the real deal. I certainly recommend him, and maybe at some point we can do a co-clinic together or something like that. And I'd love to get to ride with you at somewhere down the road. I'll also tell you, maybe I'll edit this out, but you probably can still do some clinics while you're in Colorado. Like I've gotten to the point where I fly to almost all of them. And so I don't have a day and a half of driving to get wherever and then a day and a half to come back. It's just 3 or 4 hours on a plane, and you knock out your 2 days and you're back by noon on Monday or something. And so it's not nearly as, disruptive to life. And also, I don't know exactly what your setup is over there or whatever, but flying is very helpful. So anyway, keep that in mind.
Yeah. What do you do when you get there? Do you ride someone else's horse?
It depends. I do a ton of them without a horse at all. I'm just standing on the ground, and I may climb on one like you were talking about earlier. I generally am doing a dozen people. There's always 1 or 2 that are about this far from death at any particular moment in time. And so sometimes I will ask them if they mind if I work their horse for a few minutes or something, and then I'll kind of climb on and sort a few things out for them, get the attention back, like you were saying right there. I put that right at that's step 1 as far as I'm concerned too. And then if there's something I need to demonstrate, there's probably someone there with a horse that's far enough along that I could climb on it for a minute or two and show them. But it's not, I was pretty averse to doing it that way at first. And then once I had done it that way a few times, I realized that it wasn't the impediment I was expecting it to be. And there are certain things that I would do mounted that I would do when I'm on the ground that I wouldn't do mounted. Like I'll go over and grab someone's leg and put it here. This is where you need to be or something. And if I were on a horse, I probably would have never done that, so anyway, just for your information, flying it helps a lot.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I mean, I'll definitely keep that in mind if and when this clinic thing starts to grow. And like I said, it's going to be limited because I told you I do want to grow that for sure, but it's going to be secondary to creating content and going, out west. But yeah, how close are you to I-20 over there?
It's about 3 hours north of me. I'm south of I-10.
Oh, I-10. Okay.
Yeah.
Boy, you are down there. It's hot. It's already hot down there.
Yeah, and we've been in the 80s several days already. If I get a south breeze, I have seagulls flying over my arena.
I got you. Okay.
So,
well, I don't know. Maybe we can meet up somewhere along. I'd love to buy you lunch or sit down and pick your brain some more.
Oh man,
really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I thank you for coming on.
We'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dolphin.